Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and welcome to a brand new What If. As we all know, Mark started to train in Season 3. After losing to both Anissa and having to kill Angstrom, he felt that he needed to get stronger, especially with Viltrumice and threats to come. However, in my opinion, there was a very good place to have Mark start training even earlier. In Season 2, after his loss to Omniman. So without further ado, let's see how the timeline would change if he started training early. 2 weeks would pass since that fateful day, his loss against Omniman. No, his loss against his father. Sure, he was able to come out of that alive, but he came out of that broken. He couldn't stand a chance against him. He had the willpower to fight against his father, that much was true, but he didn't have the actual power. And what good was having all of that willpower if he didn't have the strength to be able to back it up, if he didn't have the strength to be able to protect those he cared about? While part of him wanted a distraction to be able to just carry on being a superhero, he had a better choice in mind, as he had a talk with Cecil, and he made a request for Cecil to help out with his training in order for him to become as strong as possible. Rather than him requesting to become a hero again, he wanted to become as strong as he could be in order to prepare to be a hero proper. And considering how badly Invincible got his ass handed to him, Cecil understood. However, Cecil also told him that even he wouldn't be able to have training gear ready, but give his boys about a week and they should be able to come up with something. Which Mark understood. A part of him was tempted to hop back into hero work, but he wanted to wait a bit before he did that. And after 1 week, Mark would begin his training. Fortunately for him, balancing out training and his normal life was a lot easier than trying to balance out hero work. After all, he wasn't constantly on call, and it was just about adjusting the times where he needed to work out. Whenever there were threats that the other heroes couldn't handle, Mark was able to handle it. A total of 6 months would pass until his graduation. And while he did start training for a much longer period of time, he was starting at a weaker spot, considering he was missing an entire year of progress he'd normally have access to. Still, he was massively ahead of where he should have been, and was about 20% stronger than his normal counterparts. But that didn't matter on a day like today. Today was a day to celebrate. Mark Grayson was graduating high school and heading to university. Though first he had a battle with Doc Seismic, and thanks to his new power and speed he had gained, he was not just able to defeat Doc Seismic but do it with a lot less destruction to the area, also doing it at a much faster speed. Unfortunately though, because of that speed, Mark had the insufferable, inescapable fate of having to listen to a bunch of made-up inspirational quotes for his graduation. Of course, with Mark still using the GDA to train, Debbie still ends up getting angry at the GDA, and their manipulation of Mark via taking advantage of his guilt over the destruction of Chicago, leading to that encounter going similar. The Darkwing encounter would also go the same, though Mark wouldn't take as much damage, mainly because Invincible was holding back for that encounter, so I don't really see this being changed. Before we now head into Atlantis, where most of that encounter goes the same until Mark has to face off against the Depth Dweller, as the Depth Dweller attempted to slam its massive claw right into Mark, but Mark was able to dodge, moving out of the way. Even though he was slowed down by the water, he was able to move out the way thanks to his superior strength. Before Invincible flew right towards the Depth Dweller, and with a singular punch it pushed it back by a couple of feet, causing quite a bit of blood to rise from the Depth Dweller's mouth, before following that up by slamming both of his fists down on its head, slamming it down into the ground. Cecil called Mark to ask what the hell was going on. Mark responded, "You need to do a lot more research on Atlantis, but I think things are fine. I'm right now a lot stronger than this thing, so I can smooth things over." Cecil then sighed before he said, "Okay, that wasn't our deal originally, so if I see this thing start to have an advantage against you, I'm pulling you out." While Cecil didn't like the fact that he was betrayed in his trust, at the same time, if Mark did win this fight, he would be able to prove himself, and this entire conflict would be dealt with. So with that in mind, Mark rushed right back down in order to deal with the Depth Dweller, trying to deal with it as fast as possible, though holding back a bit because he didn't want to kill this thing, just knock it out. But that was where Mark made a crucial mistake. If he was a bit faster, he'd be able to land another blow on it before it could open its mouth, but once it did, it launched out a sound wave right towards Mark. This particular frequency ended up hurting Mark even more, disorienting him for long enough for the Depth Dweller to slam both of its fists onto him and hit him into the ground. Cecil then said, "You alright, kid?" Invincible considered it for a moment if he should allow Cecil to enter, but he chose not to, telling Cecil that he was fine, just that hurt him a bit. And that was something Cecil decided to keep in mind. The Depth Dweller frequency might be something he could replicate, but that was something for a scientist to experiment with later. Still, that told Mark more than enough, as he quickly rushed right towards the Depth Dweller and punched it in the face again. This punch hit even harder in comparison to the last one, causing cracks to form on its skull, before following it up with a hard punch to the back of its head, launching it right into the ground and knocking it out. Fortunately for him, avoiding any risks of it becoming free. And after defeating the Depth Dweller at that point, they were able to smooth things over with Atlantis, both partially out of respect for him being able to defeat that creature, but at the same time fear because of that power. Mark ultimately saw this as a success before he returned back to the surface. And his first day of moving into college was an absolute success. But that piece couldn't remain, as he ended up meeting a Fraxen, one who requested his help in order to save his planet in danger. Despite Cecil's orders telling him not to, Mark decided to go along with this. Besides, with the amount of power he now wielded, he felt he had more than enough. To his shock and surprise, though, he ended up meeting his father, Omniman, the now current ruler of Fraxa. Mark was prepared to fight, thinking that his father had called him here for an ambush. All this time he had been training to prepare to fight against him, but he couldn't bring himself to attack. Despite all of the anger and rage he was feeling, he couldn't. Instead, he moved to hug Omniman. Instead, he moved to hug his father, which led into Nolan showing him around the planet, showing him around what he was trying to protect, and most of all, introduced Mark to his new brother, Oliver. As they talked though, Nolan was able to notice that Mark most definitely got stronger, which was quite surprising to him. He wasn't expecting Earth to be able to help him that much. Either way though, this was something they could talk about later. They were going to need to prepare properly. Nolan told him that Viltrumites were likely going to attack this planet and soon, and while Earth has most definitely trained him up well, they were going to need more time. Unfortunately for them though, time just wasn't a thing on their side right now. The main cities began to get attacked by a total of 3 Viltrumites. Omniman told them that they needed to move Andressa out of here. They needed to make sure that their son survived, that Mark's brother survived. So we did, evacuating them to a cave. And while the two of them were able to talk about their experience of Nolan for a little bit, it didn't last long, as Lucan arrived, with Andressa and the baby quickly hiding behind a rock, while at the same time Invincible prepared to face off against them, as he asked Lucan, "What do you want?" Lucan smirked before he then said, "You. If you fight well, you will have the chance to join our Viltrumite empire. If you don't, you'll die." Before they both heard the sound of a baby, and when Mark tried to move in the way, prepare himself, he ended up getting slapped right into a wall. However, he didn't take too much damage from the impact. He was more so caught off guard, if anything. But seeing 2 lives in danger, he said, "Run!" before rushing towards Lucan and landing a hard punch right on his face, sending him skidding backwards by a couple of inches, and bruising his nose. But before he could prepare himself, Invincible closed the distance again and landed a hard punch right on his gut, winding him as he followed that up with a kick right towards his face, kicking him right into a wall and paying him back for the slap from earlier. Lucan then got up from the rock and smirked a bit before he said, "Okay, judging by that, you're on your way to being worthy. Hopefully you got more spark than that, though." From that rock slam, the cave began to get a little bit unstable. Fortunately, someone else arrived on time to save Andressa and the baby. This person, of course, being Omniman. Both Mark and Nolan nodded towards each other before looking towards their opponent, as in a quick burst of speed they began to land a flurry of blows on Lucan, forcing him out of that cave with no chance to defend. The father and son duo were able to fight alongside each other as if they hadn't missed a day of fighting in their lives despite not seeing each other for 6 months. And as Lucan was forced out the cave, 2 more Viltrumites floated down, those 2 of course being Vider and Fula. Nolan looked over to Mark and said, "Okay, you're going to need to finish off Lucan for me. I'll handle the other 2. But you need to remember, you can't hold back, Mark. You have the power to take on these Viltrumites at least in one-on-one matchups. So stop fighting like you're on Earth and go all out." Lucan then stretched his neck a little bit, as Vider and Fula looked over to him and said, "Is that right? Do they have the power to defeat us?" Lucan shook his head no, as he said, "No, I think he's just being overconfident about his kid. This planet has clearly made him soft, so you 2 handle Nolan. I have unfinished business with the boy." Vider and Fula both nodded towards Lucan before they rushed right towards Omniman, at the same time leaving Lucan to deal with Mark in a one-on-one matchup. Invincible closed his eyes for a moment, remembering everything, remembering that this man was a danger to his family, to the family he had on Earth, to the family that he had here. And he couldn't just allow that to exist. He needed to focus. He had been training so long to face off against his father, but now he needed to use that for something else, to face off against these Viltrumites, with both Mark and Lucan rushing right towards each other. Mark was able to figure out based on their initial skirmish that Lucan might actually be physically stronger than him, which also made sense considering his build. However, the strength difference wasn't that much, and Mark was also much more agile and mobile. So Mark instead decided he was going to play on the defense, as Lucan attempted to land another punch right on Mark's face, but Mark was able to duck underneath and land a punch on his gut. When he attempted to counter, Mark moved out of the way, redirecting his hand in order to land another punch on his side. Each time Lucan attempted to attack, Mark either defended himself by blocking or dodging, using that in order to land a hit of his own. When he attempted to punch him into the ground, Mark moved out of the way before uppercutting him straight in the chest and then elbowing him in the gut. Each of these blows that Mark was landing was strong enough to draw blood from Lucan. Made even more annoying by the fact that the time that it took Lucan to land one blow, Mark was able to almost land two. Still, this was going to be a competition of stamina as well as endurance. Could Lucan's endurance hold out for long enough in order to deal with Mark's stamina? Not something that he was certain of. Still, he had to admit he was impressed. This was the level he was expecting the son of Nolan to be at. However, there was one thing he could tell they were still lacking in. Even though between two of them Mark currently had the advantage, Mark wasn't going for the kill. And because of that, it was starting to make Mark more and more predictable, because going for less lethal moves limited his moveset. As Mark attempted to duck underneath one of Lucan's blows again to attempt to punch him in the side, but this time he felt a kick land right on his own side. And this blow was definitely a hard one as well. Before he could go, Lucan did attempt to grab his face and slam it into the ground. However, Mark was able to spin around his hand, using his own flight to do so, just narrowly avoiding the blow. But it was followed by Lucan attempting to land a punch on his face, forcing Mark out to block by lifting up both of his arms. Still, he felt his body shake a little bit from that punch. He knew he had the power to take down Lucan, but there was a part of him that just didn't want to kill, a part of him that he needed to get over. While that was happening, Omniman was facing off against both Vidor and Fula. Currently, Vidor was acting as the main attacker, while Fula was acting as support. Every time Vidor rushed in order to attack, he moved out of the way in order to allow Fula to attempt to slash at him. Anytime Vidor and Nolan clashed blows, Fula attempted to attack him from behind. However, the two of them were even struggling to land hits properly on Nolan. While they were capable of landing some cuts on his side, it didn't do that much. Fortunately, the two of them working together made it a lot harder for Nolan to actually attack either of them. Right now, Nolan's main goal was to try and separate them, but that was proving much harder said than done. What was even more annoying was the fact that Nolan couldn't have his full attention on this fight. After all, part of him was trying to pay attention to his son. In particular, Vidor taking advantage as he landed a punch right on his face, telling him, "Focus on us, not your boy." Before he moved out of the way as a dagger was launched right towards him, Fula's hair dagger, but Nolan was quick to react this time as he caught the hair, using it to pull Fula right past him before clapping, launching a shockwave right towards Fula as well as Vidor, launching the two of them away. Omniman then looked over, seeing that Mark was still holding back against Lucan before yelling to him, "Stop holding back! Stop fighting like an earthling and go all out. If you hold back, everyone you know will die." But before he could get another word out, both Fula and Vidor rushed towards him. And his force lifted up both his arms to block as he got two punches land on his arms. Hearing that caused Lucan to smirk as he looked towards Mark and said, "He's right, you know. If you don't prove yourself worthy, we will kill everyone you love on Earth, all of your family." Now, of course, in Lucan's mind, he was actually already worthy. He had more than proven himself, but he wanted to see everything that Mark had to offer. And when Mark heard that, he knew for a fact that they were telling the truth. Plus, he needed to help his father no matter what. Right now, helping Nolan was the only way they could properly prepare in order to repel against Viltrumites. Invincible then rushed towards Lucan, closing the distance in a surprising amount of speed. Before Lucan could even get out another word, he felt a hard punch land right on his cheek, causing him to lose a tooth and sending him flying backwards. As he thought to himself, they're almost as fast as Anissa. And when Lucan tried to counter that, he ducked underneath the punch before punching him hard in the stomach, causing Lucan to cough up blood. As Mark stared up and said, "I'm not letting anyone hurt my family, not again," before launching himself upwards and headbutting him straight in the nose, breaking his nose with that blow. Lucan couldn't believe this. He didn't think Mark was holding back this much. Even Fula and Vidor were a bit surprised by that as well. However, that just left Nolan to smirk, as he looked towards them both and punched them both in the face, causing them both to have a nosebleed. Before he said, "I believe you both wanted my undivided attention, right?" Knowing that his son was fully going to be able to handle himself now it was his turn to finish his own fight. Both Vidor and Fula wiped off the blood from their nose. That most definitely hurt. Did Nolan not go soft? No, they were just caught off guard. That had to be it. All they had to do was make sure they beat Nolan. Worst case scenario, they stalled for a bit more time. After all, General Krieg had brought other Viltrumites with him. And with that focus returned to the both of them, the battle continued. Nolan slowly turning it around on both of them, starting to get the advantage and predict their movements. While at the same time Mark continued on the offensive, Lucan now barely able to hit him, but the few hits Lucan did land did end up causing some damage. However, Mark's hits were serious. Each of these hits were strong enough to draw blood. Tens of minutes began to pass. Everyone's stamina were starting to wear down. Mark was taking blows, Omniman was taking blows, but Lucan, Vidor, and Fula were especially in bad spots. Mark was taking advantage of his agility and his speed, landing two hard punches on Lucan's cheek before sweeping him by the leg and punching him into the ground, causing a crater to form with Lucan inside of it. Before Mark flew up and then launched himself right down towards Lucan, slamming both of his feet right into his stomach and knocking him out with that blow, causing Lucan to cough a heavy amount of blood. And he looked down towards Lucan for a moment. He was about to punch him, to try and kill him, before he decided not to. Life was something sacred. That was something he needed to defy. Even the life of an enemy was something sacred. And if he didn't need to kill them in order to defeat them, he'd choose not to. At the same time, Nolan dodged one of Fula's stab attempts before grabbing her hair and beginning to spin, throwing her a far distance away. As he looked over to Vider, who was trying to chase him, and before Vider could reach, Nolan slammed both of his fists right into Vider's head, breaking his skull, and causing him to fall to the ground. But unlike his son, who showed mercy, Nolan chose not to, as he stomped right on Vider's head, finishing him off and killing him. Mark then floated out from the hole to head over to Nolan, who Nolan by this point was actually quite a bit more bloody than him. Of course, Mark was damaged, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as Nolan, which Nolan couldn't help but give a smirk. Who knows, son? Maybe in a year or two you might actually be as strong as me. And they both looked towards Fula, who was slowly getting up, preparing herself to face off against the two of them. Even though she was the weakest of the three Viltrumites that were sent to attack, she wasn't going to go down. That wasn't the Viltrumite way. Surrender was for the weak, and she wasn't weak. When Invincible saw that, in truth he felt a little bit bad, as he couldn't help but think to himself that this was the corrupting nature of the Viltrumite Empire. Still, if the both of them could defeat them and potentially just knock them out rather than killing them like they did with Vider, then maybe things could be better, who knows. If Nolan, his own father, could change, why not these other Viltrumites? Before Nolan snapped his fingers, he told him, "Remember, son, these people are not going to change. We need to take them down in order to defend everybody." And Mark couldn't help but respond, "If you could change, why can't they? You got a chance to be good, so don't they deserve that same chance?" And those words actually hit for Nolan, making the thought enter into his mind just for a second. If he could change, why couldn't his own people? Before he shook that off, he knew that would be near impossible. If it took him so long to change, there was no way they'd be able to do it either. Not to mention the fact that Fula couldn't help but laugh as she said, "Oh please, I'm not going to change. I am a true Viltrumite, unlike your father, and we do not change our mind. The only way you can save your people is by killing me. The weak deserve to die." But that was when a smirk rose onto Fula, as 5 Viltrumites came down from the sky, 3 of them slamming right into Nolan's back, while 2 of them slammed into Mark's, slamming them into the ground hard. The 4 Viltrumites were led by General Krieg, people that he had brought as backup to take out Omniman just in case. Both Mark and Nolan were on the verge of being knocked out, and now they were completely surrounded. So at the last moment before they were knocked out, Nolan made sure to tell Mark something, to read his books. And in that moment they were rushed down by the other 5 Viltrumites joined by Fula, both of them beaten heavily with several blows coming towards them and knocked out, though neither of them were killed. After some time, Mark began to wake up. His father was on the ship, but when he woke up he saw General Krieg staring down at him, and he told Mark, "Don't speak, just listen. Today you have proven yourself as more than strong enough to enter into our empire. In terms of strength, you are on the level of an elite Viltrumite, and you have most certainly impressed me. However, I know you're a kind soul, and more importantly defiant." As Invincible interrupted by saying, "Go fuck." Before he could finish that, Krieg punched him straight in the mouth, as he then continued, saying, "Because of your strength, the Viltrumite Empire wants to welcome you into our ranks. And since your father has chosen to go against our way, his burden now falls onto you. But in my opinion, you've been put in quite an advantageous position. So you now have 2 choices. Either you make Earth bow to our empire, kill whoever you deem as necessary, but you'd have an easier time, or we must do it. And if we have to do it, millions, if not billions of your people will die. While I know this choice might seem undesirable for you, I want you to remember, you still have the chance to make a better outcome. Defiance will not serve you. So we will come to the planet sooner or later in order to check on you and your progress," Krieg would say before leaving behind the injured Mark to find his own way back to Earth, knowing he'd more than likely heal pretty fast, leaving the message behind for Mark. Though this wasn't a complete failure for him, his training had proven effective. He was enough to beat Lucan. If it wasn't for the fact they were outnumbered, he would be strong enough. But Invincible shook his head. He needed to get stronger. He needed to make sure he was prepared, especially considering the Empire knew about his strength now. They'd definitely be sending someone to match him. And another thought entered into him as well. Maybe he should have killed Lucan. Was he too merciful? He shook that off. He just needed more power. He just needed the power to bring them into the good side, to force them to see better. He just needed to get stronger. And he'd make sure that once those Viltrumites arrived to Earth, he'd be strong enough to repel any of them off, no matter how strong they were. He looked back to the city though for a moment. Guilt entered into his heart. Guilt from the fact he couldn't help properly defend the city, seeing how destroyed it was. So he decided he'd spend some time behind. His training could wait. He was going to help to repair the city however best he could. Maybe he could even get some training in while he was here as well. And with that, he flew to the city to begin helping repairs and reconstruction, as well as helping relief efforts to find those who were injured, including the baby brother he now had. Currently, the two Viltrumites that had fought against Mark and the Great Nolan were recovering, resting in some medical bays that were specifically designed in order to help their recovery, using the advanced technology of Viltrumites in order to help with this. Though with Lucan in particular, several thoughts were coursing through his head. The feeling he felt of inferiority to Mark. In that moment, he was able to learn that Mark was most certainly stronger than him, and the fact he wasn't dead. That wasn't a mistake on Mark's part. He knew that was the case. It wasn't just Mark not failing to kill him, it was Mark choosing not to. Though he was dismissing that right now as just a weakness from a weak boy who would become weak thanks to Earth, but it wouldn't be long until they properly joined the Viltrumite Empire, until he properly accepted their way. However, that feeling couldn't leave him, the fact that he was spared. He was spared out of kindness, laying the seed of doubt to be sprouted in Lucan. However, it would just remain as a seed for now, but who knows what that seed could grow into in the future, or if that seed would die out with enough time. Months would pass on Fraxa. During this time, Mark was helping out with the rebuilding and reconstruction of Fraxa. He was sort of stuck on the planet until they had a spaceship ready for him. While he could definitely fly back to Earth, he didn't exactly know the way of how to get there or how to get back, so he figured he might as well wait. And with the power he wielded, he knew he most definitely would be able to help with the reconstruction. But the time eventually came. The spaceship was ready, and even though he was able to help to repair a good chunk of the city, there were still parts of it left that he couldn't really repair. There were still parts of it that needed more time. The thought re-entering into Mark's head. What if he was stronger? If he was stronger, he'd be able to help repair the city in no time. If he was stronger, none of this would have happened. If he was stronger, his father never would have gotten captured. Thoughts that were continuing to loop in his head that all came from the same desire, for more power, for him to become stronger. If he was, he'd be able to accomplish anything. That was what he had learned. While he was closer, while he was able to take on Viltrumites now, there were still other powers that were beyond him. The power of several Viltrumites were the next thing he wanted to overcome. After a talk with Andressa, he decided to take her request, taking his little brother with him. After all, he could tell all of them were going to die soon of natural age, but his brother wouldn't. His brother would likely live out a normal life, so he would take the baby to Earth, with the baby eventually gaining the name Oliver. And after this point, not that much actually ends up changing. The Lizard League obviously doesn't change because Mark wasn't involved with that fight to begin with, and the second mission would only be easier, but I still see it going mostly the same. The changes would only really be minor, and in my opinion, it's not really worth covering them. Which is when we move on to the events that happened in episode 7. While Mark and Amber do have a stronger relationship in this in comparison to canon, because during the time right before graduation he was just training and not actually fighting as often, he would still have a rather strained relationship, especially considering Fraxa still happened. But with all of this, Mark gets the same amount of determination to try and focus on balancing everything out. He'd already been able to figure out ways to balance his normal training life into this, so he should be able to figure out how to balance a relationship into this as well. Several heroes have done it, even his own father did it. Though his father wasn't really a normal human after all. Unfortunately for Mark Grayson, life had other plans for him in store. Somebody else arrived in order to bring Mark onto his side. A much stronger Viltrumite than the ones he had faced off against. Anissa, threatening to kill Amber right then and there if Mark decided not to talk with them. Even with all the power he had, even if he was much stronger than Anissa, there was no way he was going to be strong and fast enough yet to be able to close that distance before Anissa could slightly move her hand and kill Amber. So knowing how much of a bad spot he was in, he agreed, and Anissa flew into the sky with Mark embracing Amber, trying to help calm her down before leaving, as arrived high in the sky in order to meet with Anissa, in order to discuss with her and discuss why she was here. Once the two of them flew to the sky, Cecil immediately connected to Mark, telling them to stall for as long as possible. While they had been trying to figure out good counters to Viltrumites, they hadn't been too successful up to this point. Their best option were the Reaniman. But even then, they weren't too sure how successful they would be. More importantly, they also weren't too sure if they wanted to expose that to Mark yet. Even then, they didn't really have a choice. After all, the Reaniman were not ready yet. There was also the option of that frequency, but it was untested. Right now, though, they were continuing to listen in on the conversation between Anissa and Mark. Anissa stating the current state of the world, as well as how little Mark truly knew about his own people. But in particular, one line stuck for Mark, as Anissa said, "We have the technology to repair this planet, fix its climate, feed their hungry, punish their criminals. We can do more for them in a year than you could do in 100. You are failing this planet and its people. Do you not see that?" Another reminder of the fact that Mark couldn't lead the planet as he wanted to. Another reminder that he wasn't strong enough. As Mark said, "No, I can become strong enough to fix these problems. My father is a lot older than me. Hundreds, maybe thousands of years older than me. And he was the strongest hero on our planet. In spite of that and me being young for Viltrumite age, I was able to catch up to him in strength. I have the tools to fix the problems on this planet. And do it my way. I just need to get stronger, and I'm going to keep getting stronger." And this response actually caused some intrigue to rise from Anissa, though it also caused some worry to rise from Cecil. While Anissa didn't say this out loud, mainly because she wanted to play her cards right, she had to admit, Mark was acting a lot more like a Viltrumite than she thought he was. Of course, he didn't have the same mindset of might above all else, but he did have the mindset that might is the only way to achieve peace, that might was the only way to force the world to work as they desired. Maybe there was a way they could make things work in their favor, they just needed to play Mark right. At the same time, Donald gave them a report. As Donald said, "So from what we can tell, Mark might actually be pretty close to Anissa in power, if not even with them." That caused Cecil's eyes to widen a little bit in surprise. However, that only really helped to strengthen the worry he was already feeling. He really wasn't sure how much he could trust Mark. That mindset Mark had wasn't dangerous right now, but it definitely had the potential to go into something much more dangerous. As Anissa then said, "So you see power as the absolute way to solve all problems. And you're trying to achieve that power if I understand you correctly. The Viltrumites can help you achieve that power. We have technology that far surpasses whatever you've been using here on Earth, and if you've already been able to reach a level comparable to that of your father, despite having your powers for around a year if I remember correctly, you'll be able to make much greater strides under us, and our superior technology to what Earth has, as well as proper programs on how to train properly as a Viltrumite. We are giving you the tools to achieve that ambition, Mark, to achieve that ideal, but here you are resisting the clear and obvious path to achieve everything you desire. We can give you the tools and power to be able to turn this planet into a utopia. You don't have to be stubborn. You don't have to work against us." And those words in particular hit for Mark, and for a moment he honestly found himself rather tempted. After all, they were right. They did have those tools. They did have the weaponry if everything that she was saying was right. If everything she was saying was right, he could potentially have the tools to achieve the power necessary to make the world change. Maybe he could even make the Viltrumite Empire change. But he shook that thought off for a moment as he remembered what Omniman did, the destruction he caused Chicago, remembering what Luke and Viter and Fula did as well. The destruction they caused to Fraxa. Sure, they had similar ideals, but Invincible wanted to do it differently. They were okay with any amount of slaughter being necessary. He wasn't. His goal was to become strong enough to make sure something like Omniman would never happen again, to make sure the world could be changed, to make sure he was strong enough to protect it for the better. However, before he could respond, Cecil told them there was a behemoth-class kaiju on the loose, and for them to bring Anissa over towards it in order to see if they could learn more things about her. And with Anissa hearing that, she decided she was curious to see what the son of Nolan was capable of. Sure, she'd heard the reports that he was able to fight alongside Nolan, alongside the fact that he defeated Lucan, but actions speak a lot louder than words, and she really wanted to see how strong he was, leading to the both of them flying away in order to deal with the kaiju. When they arrived, they saw a massive sea beast currently wrapping its massive tail around the ship, trying to crush it. Mark told Anissa to wait there, as he quickly flew right towards the beast and punched it straight in the face. And Anissa, being observant, decided to watch how things were going to go. If things weren't going fast enough though, she would intervene. But as she watched, she had to admit she was impressed by Mark's strength, as Mark in rapid succession landed several blows onto the beast, and when it tried to counterattack, Mark was able to catch it and use it in order to push it even further. Still though, as Anissa was watching, she was able to notice something else. Mark wasn't fighting to kill right now. As a giant kaiju attempted to slam its head right into Mark, this attack was actually a success, mainly due to Mark holding back, resulting in Mark crashing right into the water, before he immediately flew out and uppercut the kaiju. As he was fighting it, the ship was making more and more distance. Thankfully they intervened when they did, resulting in the ship not taking as much damage, but still, Mark was taking way too long, as Anissa sighed before speeding up, and going right through the brain of the kaiju, killing it in a single shot. Before she then said, "You wielded the power and speed to do the exact same thing I did, but it's that mercy that held you back. You're strong, Mark, but at the same time, you don't want to kill. That is the weakness that holds you back. And the immediate action that our empire, once it takes over the planet, will not suffer from. And if you successfully train under us, you will no longer suffer from that as well. You will have just as successful results as I will. You have the potential for it. It's your mercy getting in the way." But Mark shook his head as he said, "No, it's not my mercy. It's the fact that I'm not strong enough. It's the fact that I don't have enough control. You had to go for immediately killing that thing. But if I get strong enough to the point where I can force it to stop without having to kill, then I'll be strong enough. I just lack the control necessary in order to do so." Anissa raised a brow before she then said, "Is that how you treat all of your battles?" Before she floated towards him and put a hand on his shoulder, she said, "Strength is necessary to solve all issues, Mark. However, if you continue to allow that mercy of yours to get in the way, to not kill who is necessary to kill, they will come back stronger. Your strength will allow them to learn. That is the difference between us and you. That is why you are still stagnating in your ability to grow. Strength is necessary, yes, but it is the removal of that mercy that will allow you to achieve the great heights that our empire will allow you to. You have the potential to do so many good things, Mark, but that can only happen if you're being the Viltrumite you are supposed to be. You can be greater than your father, but it will require you to stop trying to delay the inevitable and abandon that mercy. The threats need to die in order to make sure that this planet can prosper. You can make it so." Before moving her hand off his shoulder and moving back a little bit, giving him some time to think about what she had just said, to fully process it. And Mark truly was. He was listening to every single word she said. A part of him truly wondered if he was going down the right path, if sparing people was the right thing to do. If that mercy was what was getting in the way of him being able to actually help people. Not his strength. It wasn't that he was too weak, it was that he wasn't ruthless enough. Maybe there are some people he should kill. Maybe there are some lives he should end. If he was going for the kill the entire time on Luke and on Fraxa, maybe he wouldn't have been as damaged. Maybe he would have been able to help his father as well. Was that mercy his drawback? But then he remembered the lessons his mother taught him, the fact that all life was sacred. As Mark then said, "But all lives are sacred. Don't all lives deserve a chance to become better? Who are we to take away those lives? I'm not a killer, and if I become strong enough, I can make sure nobody needs to die." That caused Anissa to cross her arms as she looked towards him before looking back to the kaiju as he said, "Do you think if you were strong enough you could force that beast to no longer be a threat to people? No, you couldn't. It would attack the second you looked away. And that goes same with all threats on this planet, because you can't be everywhere at once. The only way you can really help people is by taking action, by eliminating those who aren't worthy of existing, by eliminating threats like those and making sure they can't harm the people who are worthy of existing again. You have the power to do that, but you lack the spine. But we can help you with both. Your ideals are close to that of our own. You just lack the heart and soul necessary to do it, but you can gain it. It's not that hard of a change to make." And with that, Invincible thought about it for a couple more seconds, contemplating it, before Mark shook his head no as he said, "People deserve that chance to change, deserve that chance to be better. But once I kill them, any chance of them having to be able to become better is gone, removed. And I'm not going to remove that chance. I'm going to make sure people will be able to take it and become better. Anissa sighed before she quickly closed the distance, catching Mark off guard and punching him straight in the face, causing some blood to come down from his nose. As she then said, "Prove your ideal then. Prove you're strong enough to force change. Prove with enough power that you can force things to be better how you view them. If you defeat me, I will allow you to continue doing things your way. I'll report to the Empire that you're doing it right. But if you can't, then you will be forced to go along with our ways of the Viltrumite Empire. So prove your ideal." That punch hurt a lot more than Mark was expecting it to, though still was something he could handle. The harder part about this was the fact he was certain that him and Anissa were equal. However, they might be equal in terms of physical capability. Anissa was much more experienced. More than that, he knew Anissa was going to be more serious about this than he was. As Nolan's words looped through his head again, "Stop fighting like you are an Earthling. Fight like a Viltrumite." A focus entering into Mark's eyes as he rushed right towards Anissa, and Anissa quickly closed the gap between the two of them, clashing fists immediately and sending a shockwave throughout the water, sending a ripple and tidal wave all across the area. A smirk rising onto Anissa as she said, "You are strong, I'll give you that." Before both of them pulled their fists back as Mark attempted to land another punch, this time going for her face, but Anissa was able to deflect it and land a punch right on his stomach. "In spite of that though, your movements are quite easy to read." This time Mark tried to land a kick on her head, but Anissa was able to fly underneath it, moving out of the way of it before flying upwards and uppercutting him. And as he was being launched up into the air, she grabbed his foot and began to spin around, throwing him right into the water. And Mark groaned as he crashed into the water, stopping himself. Anissa was a much different fighter in comparison to Lucan, where if Lucan had the speed and agility advantage, it was the exact opposite here. Anissa had a speed and agility advantage. But more than that, she knew how to fight a lot better. But his thoughts were interrupted as Anissa went right into the water, flying right after him and attempting to land another punch onto his chest. But this time Mark was quick enough to block. That caused Anissa to smirk a little bit as she pushed Mark out of the water, starting to land a rapid amount of blows on him. Though Mark was starting to adapt, he was starting to block them. However, when she tried to counterattack, that's when another problem came, as Anissa caught the blow before headbutting him, hitting him right in the nose while at the same time holding his hand, disorienting Mark for a second, long enough for Anissa to let go of his hand and then move both of her hands right towards his chest, clapping and sending a shockwave point blank towards it. As she said, "The first thing we're certainly going to fix is your fighting style. You are too easy to predict right now." Cecil closed his fist while he was watching this. It was as he was expecting and as he feared. Even though Mark and Anissa were equals in terms of physical capabilities, that wasn't all that mattered in a fight. Anissa was much more experienced than him. He looked towards Donald to see if they had anything they could send as backup, but right now everything was too far. Anissa and Mark were going to be moving too fast for anything to be able to catch up. Cecil hated this. He hated his inadequacy. But more than that, there was a slight concern that was still rising in him, rising because of Mark's morality. As Cecil looked over to Donald and said, "We're going to need to up our countermeasures against Viltrumites. Mark's morality right now is not something I'm certain we can trust. Someone who has that high value in strength and the ability to do whatever they want, no matter how good their desires might be, is not someone I think we can trust." And Donald nodded, though in truth he was hoping that it really wouldn't have come down to this, but still he understood why. Mark right now in his ideology was the seeds to something very dangerous, and not something that either of them could risk, especially right now. As they looked back to the screen to see Mark and Anissa fighting, Mark took a moment to properly stabilize himself, as Anissa decided to allow him to have that moment. "Do you now see the futility in your actions, or must I continue to beat you down?" Mark closed both of his fists as he then said, "I am not backing down. I am going to prove I'm right," before immediately rushing right towards Anissa, trying to close the distance and land a punch on her. But Anissa moved out of the way, able to see him coming as she decided to uppercut his stomach, or at least try to, but this time Mark was actually able to catch her punch. As Anissa blinked, giving an amused smile, he was starting to learn, before she started to get spun around and thrown into the water, a similar method to how she had done it before to him. But Anissa just allowed that to happen, curious at what he was learning, curious at how much he was learning from her. She stopped herself before she could actually make contact with the water, and as she looked up she saw Mark clap his hands together, sending a massive shockwave right towards her, but she instead countered with her own shockwave, clapping her own hands. Mark's was much wider as a shockwave, but as a result of that it was much less focused, while Anissa's was much more precise. Her skill and mastery over the technique was on display, overpowering Mark's due to the precision, causing Mark to be launched even higher into the air, and while he was being launched, Anissa quickly flew behind him, her fist raised high before punching him hard in the back. As she said, "You're adaptive, I can give you that as well, but that won't matter so long as you're not fighting to kill, so long as you still have that mercy." Before she grabbed Mark by the leg and this time threw him right towards an abandoned island, throwing him quite a far distance and then landing on top of him, slamming both of her knees right into his stomach, causing a massive dust cloud to rise, before she aimed her hands down and sent a shockwave right towards Mark's chest again, clapping her hands hard, causing Mark to cough up some blood as she stood on both of his hands. "Do you finally understand what I am trying to tell you, Mark?" Invincible then spit out some blood as he said, "No, I'm not going to become a killer. I'll become strong enough to give people those second chances. I will become strong enough to help people, and I'll do it my own way." Anissa then sighed as she moved her feet off of him. "Killing you is not my task. I can tell you're so close, likely only needing time to truly understand things. But I will warn you, someone far stronger and far worse than me is coming. His experience, strength, and speed will all overpower you. And if he finds you still rebelling, if he still finds you going against the Viltrumite Empire, he will not be as merciful as I was to talk with you. He will kill you. He will kill everyone on this planet. So make the right choice." Before she flew away, leaving Mark there to recover, as Cecil teleported in right after. Seeing the injured Mark, though he thankfully wasn't too injured, mainly just some bleeding, things that wouldn't take too long to heal and fix up. As he said, "Seems you have some prep to do, and we're going to need to talk when we get back." After the battle against Anissa, both Mark and Cecil would have arrived to the Pentagon, currently sitting on the roof of the base. Cecil had something he needed to talk with Mark about. He found Mark's current ideology way too dangerous, and he knew if he didn't talk to him about it now, there was a much greater chance of it getting worse. So before Mark could even ask why they were talking, Cecil started to talk. "Mark, I want you to know I don't think you're anything like your father before I start this conversation. And I do trust you. You've put your life on the line in order to protect this planet. You've been training ever since you lost to him in order to get strong enough to be its guardian, and you've done amazing work. But the way things are going, you're developing a very dangerous ideology, one that could lead you down a very dangerous path." And Mark raised a brow. If he was being honest, he wasn't in the mood to have any more talks about his ideology. After having to fight against Anissa and hearing how much ideology they were talking about, he wasn't really in the mood for it right now. But at the same time, he felt this conversation was going to go different. But in particular, he looked rather confused. How could his ideology be dangerous? As he asked that very question, saying, "How is my ideology a problem? I just believe with my strength I'm going to be able to guide people down a better path. And if I'm strong enough, nobody will ever try and challenge me. We'll be able to make a better world of how powerful I am, once they realize they aren't going to be able to beat me. I'm just not strong enough. I wasn't strong enough on Fraxa, and I wasn't strong enough against Anissa, but I will be strong enough for whatever Viltrumite comes next." Cecil moved a hand onto his shoulder and shook his head, as he said, "Unfortunately, that's not how the world works. As much as I hate to say this, I do agree with Anissa. There are some people who do need to die. There are some people who will never change. You being the strongest isn't automatically going to make somebody change. If that was the case, when the Guardians of the Globe and Nolan were acting, they would have been able to stop so many villains from turning bad. The world wouldn't be in the state it was. But there are some people who will always be corrupt and evil. There will be some threats that power will never be enough to solve, no matter how much stronger you are. But if you continue to put so much faith into power, it will lead you down a very dangerous ideology, one that could potentially make you have a desire to do whatever you please just because you're strong enough. That is truthfully what I'm afraid of. But I also know you, kid. I don't think you will go down that path, but I don't want you to have to find that out the hard way. I want you to learn the lesson easy. You're not a hero because you're the strongest. You're not saving people because you're the strongest. The only way you truly can save people is by being the person who saves them. It doesn't require the strongest person on the planet. All it requires is a hero. After all, no one was stronger than you on that day, but it was still you who won. You still managed to have an effect on him that led the steps to him turning good. It's not going to be your power that will let people turn good. You can't put so much faith in your power. You have to put some faith into yourself. Instead, think of your power as a platform to let people be able to see the light. Think of your power as a way to protect people. Power is not going to automatically turn them good. You understand? Upon hearing that, Mark went completely silent for a moment, taking in those words. He didn't really have a counter-argument against Cecil. The only real counter-argument that he did have was just that maybe the Guardians of the Globe and his father weren't strong enough. But he was able to process what Cecil was saying. He understood it. The logic did make sense. And he knew the Omniman example made sense as well. The only reason he was able to turn him good wasn't because he was strong. If he was strong, either he would have killed his father that day, or his father might have killed him. And Mark just gave a nod before he said, "I understand. Now I'm gonna head home. I have a baby brother I need to check up on." And Cecil nodded as he said, "You go do that." Before Mark flew away, heading back to the direction of his home, Cecil watching Mark fly away before Donald came up and asked him, "Do you think he's gonna understand the lesson?" Which led Cecil to shaking his head, before saying, "Unfortunately, no. When it comes to a lesson like this is going to be one that he's going to need to experience head-on in order to properly learn. Unfortunately, the only way for him to really learn this lesson is going to be him fighting against a villain weaker than him that will never turn good." Which either way, this is definitely going to devastate Mark. We're going to need to be there to help him when the time comes for that, though. But for now, we're going to need to continue helping with Mark's training. On top of that, we're going to need to upgrade the reanimant even further. Mark's rate of growth is surpassing what we expected. So we might need to start working on constructing another base as well, just in case. And see if we can get another interview of the Muller twins. There might be a good chance we're going to need them as well. On top of that, start looking for any villain or hero who might have died in recent times. We're going to need to really push ourselves in order to make sure Mark isn't our only defense. Especially if we're going to deal with another Viltrumite that might be stronger than the one that came. And Donald nodded, giving the order out for the GDA in order to begin looking. A total of 3 months would pass. 3 months of constant training with Mark. By the GDA's estimates, Mark was now 90% stronger. His speed had gone up by a total of 50%, and endurance by 60%. Now, I do know this is actually less than canon, but I feel it's fair, especially considering the fact this Mark already started on par with his Season 3 self in Season 2. I just checked my notes. He didn't start on par, he started 20% stronger, so I feel that's even more fair. Plus, Cecil is constantly playing catch-up right now, so it is a little bit understandable that they are going to have lesser results in comparison. This is also technically greater results since this is a stronger Mark, but that doesn't really matter. Just for giving the number comparisons. Anyways, back to the story. Things are going to mostly go the same all the way up until Doc Seismic, which does include Mark asking out Adam Eve, though it's going to be without the awkwardness of the time travel thing happening. The reason why this is going to happen is because thanks to Mark being able to balance out a training schedule with being able to do schoolwork, he was able to keep better connections with his friends. The reason the fight between Dropkick Fightmaster as well as Multipole doesn't change is because Mark holds back in that fight. But as Invincible and Adam Eve are currently sitting down in Adam Eve's new treehouse, they both get an alert. Every hero in the United States have been captured by Doc Seismic. Both Invincible and Adam Eve are going to need to go in order to help free the heroes. Invincible and Adam Eve both sent each other a smirk. After all, they just had to deal with this guy again. There was no way he was going to be that strong. Little did they know, Doc Seismic had done specific preparations for that. After all, he had experienced fighting Mark before, and he knew what type of strength he was going to go up against. He expected them to also be stronger, and he was prepared to take them both on. When Mark and Adam Eve arrived, they saw several massive beasts. Magma men that dwarfed over the one Mark fought previously, giant spiders and giant centipedes with acid dripping off of them, as well as each hero trapped inside of what looked like a web. And Doc Seismic smiled as he said, "Ah, good. The ones I really wanted to fight have arrived. But this time I've come with a lot more allies from the Earth, prepared to take back what properly belongs to them." Mark then said, "I'm only going to say this once. Surrender right now, and you will not have to go to prison with a broken arm. Just release all the heroes you took, and I won't have to beat you." Doc Seismic chuckled a little bit as he said, "I can't believe you're so confident you can beat me now. Though, I suppose I shouldn't blame you. But no, I choose not," as several of the centipedes rushed right towards Mark, while at the same time 3 of the magma men jumped towards Adam Eve and fired bursts of magma right towards her. Adam Eve quickly made a pink shield around herself, using it in order to block several of the bursts of lava, before she lifted up her hand, firing down a pink pillar towards one of the magma men, sending them flying back into the ground, but it wasn't long until they reformed themselves. At the same time, 5 more magma men flew right towards her back, but Adam Eve just narrowly was able to fly above them before they could land. It was pretty clear to her solid attacks weren't going to work on the magma men, so she was going to need to figure out another way to fight them. But she didn't get much time to focus as Doc Seismic clapped both of his hands together and fired a shockwave right towards Adam Eve, hitting her in the direction of one of the walls. But she was just narrowly able to stop herself, yet again pink energy flowing from underneath her feet, or at least she was until she felt a web wrap around one of her hands. And she was thrown right back to the direction of Doc Seismic as Doc Seismic clapped his hands once more, sending out another shockwave right towards her, sending her flying into the ground and knocking her out. Several of the spiders at the same time began to head right down towards Adam Eve's direction. At the same time, Mark was currently fighting against a total of 4 of the centipedes. One of them had charged directly into him as he lifted up both of his arms in order to block, stopping the charge dead in its tracks, before he punched it hard in the face, sending it flying backwards. When 2 more of the centipedes had tried to attack it, Mark clapped both of his hands together, a similar motion to what his father did in sending a shockwave towards them, sending them both flying backwards by tens of feet even despite of their massive size. That was when 3 more magma men jumped towards him, or at least attempted to, but Mark was able to fly past them before they could even land. And the second he did, he clapped once more, sending a shockwave right towards them and avoiding them. As he looked over and heard the noise of Adam Eve falling to the ground, and he thought to himself, how did he do that? Doc Seismic wasn't meant to be this strong. But at the last moment, he heard the sound of a centipede coming towards him, about to chomp down on him, but he just narrowly was able to avoid it, other than one slight slash that landed on his side. But even though he avoided it, it did manage to inject a little bit of its venom into his body, causing a smirk to rise on Doc Seismic. It wasn't going to be enough to beat him yet, but it was only a matter of time. And Mark felt that dizziness begin to set in for a moment. He moved a hand onto his head, but rage began to fill him. Rage from the fact he couldn't be there to help Adam Eve, as he flew right towards Doc Seismic at full speed. Under any other circumstance, this hit would have landed, but thanks to dizziness, Doc Seismic was just narrowly able to move out of the way. And Doc Seismic clapped his hands again, firing out a shockwave right towards Mark, but it didn't work. Mark flew right past it. And he attempted to reach Doc Seismic, but once he did, several webs wrapped around his arms and leg. From 3 different directions, spiders were pulling on him. But Mark began to rapidly spin, launching spiders all across the place, in particular at different centipedes. More importantly, through this method, he was able to shake some of the venom out of him, making the effects a bit lesser. Not fully, but a bit lesser. Before he clapped behind himself, sending a shockwave right towards himself instead, using that in order to launch himself at an even faster speed towards Doc Seismic, before landing a hard punch right on his cheek, slamming him into the ground. And he flew right down towards Doc Seismic and punched both of his gauntlets, breaking them with that blow and disabling his connection back towards the other underground creatures. At that same time, Adam Eve was starting to wake up, and the other heroes were starting to realize this fight was over, as Mark lifted up Doc Seismic and said, "All of that genius, all of that power, and yet you still choose to hurt people? Why? What do you gain from all this?" Which that made a laugh come from Doc Seismic as he said, "Do you not remember the first time we met and what I told you so long ago? And even what I told you before we started, I am returning the land that humanity has taken from the Earth back to the Earth, and I won't stop. I will find a way. I will come back stronger. Now I just know what level to fight against, hero. If you can even call yourself that for how much you fight for a planet of thieves." And that annoyed Invincible, and that angered him. Before he then said, "I'm going to make sure you never escape from prison again. Your bracelets are now broken. You won't be able to reach out to anybody, and maybe you'll be able to get the help you need." Which caused Doc Seismic to laugh a bit more as he said, "Me need help? I see how humanity is clearly. Once I'm done, I will rebuild this entire system, one that the Earth will be able to thrive in, and there's nothing you can do to change that." The Immortal then floated over to Invincible as he said, "I'll take it from here." Several soldiers of the GDA were also starting to teleport in, seeing that this entire battle was over. And Mark nodded, handing Doc Seismic over to the Immortal. For a moment he considered if he should kill Doc Seismic, but no, he chose not to. If Doc Seismic did escape again, he would just shatter his ambitions even harder. That was the lesson he took from this. though he couldn't help but think on Cecil's words again, about the fact that not everybody was going to change. And now, even more, the thought was starting to come into him that maybe, just maybe, Cecil might have been right, but he didn't want to accept it. Not yet. Maybe Doc Seismic was just an off case. Maybe Doc Seismic could be repaired. But his focus went elsewhere as he floated back over to Adam Eve and picked her up, mainly just to check if she was doing okay. She seemed to be doing fine, just caught off guard by how strong the blast from Doc Seismic actually was. Still, this is just going to be extra motivation for Adam Eve to get stronger. She was going to need to catch up to Mark, somehow. But they both were well aware of the fact that Mark was certainly the strongest superhero on the planet, and this was just proof of that. If every hero in America wasn't able to stand up to Doc Seismic, but Mark was able to stop him on his own, then he must be getting closer to that level of absolute strength that he thought was necessary. But even though he was, he didn't feel like he made any changes to Doc Seismic. And with that, both Mark and Eve left for now, heading back home. Cecil watched with a bit of a happy smile right now. After all, he was happy to see that his reaniman wasn't necessary. He didn't need to reveal that card yet. But more importantly, he had been able to get the details of the several beasts that existed here, the beasts that Doc Seismic found. And while not all of them died, some of them did, and a part of him wondered, what could he learn from their bodies? It wasn't like they were weak. They were able to take several hits from Invincible as well as deal with every single hero on America. So after all the heroes left, several members of the GDA stayed behind, starting to get samples from these creatures, as well as picking up the remaining parts of the bracelets that Doc Seismic wore in order to control them. From what they knew, the bracelets was the reason why Doc Seismic went crazy, but maybe they could find a way to refine it. Maybe they could find a way to use it for better. Or at least figure out a way to advance it as well and use it for themselves. But there was another reason why Cecil was happy. He was starting to see that mentality he wanted Mark to gain was starting to grow. It wasn't there yet, but the first part of it had been pushed into him with Doc Seismic. However, one villain wasn't going to be enough of a case in order to push Mark in the right direction. There were going to need to be a few more in order to fully push Mark in that direction, which he only hoped that Mark would be able to get. Or he hoped that Mark would realize the flaw in his ideology before even needing to have to fight against those villains. That would ultimately be the best outcome, but even he knew that was wishful thinking. When Mark returned back home, Debbie was able to immediately see that something was up with him. By this point, she had already put Oliver to sleep, so she asked him if things were alright and if he wanted to talk. Mark thought about it for a couple of moments. He honestly didn't really want to talk about how he was feeling, but at the same time, he felt if anybody would know the answer to what he was looking for, it would be his mom. His mom was his sense of morality, his guide, his compass. So he decided to ask her, I recently had to fight against a villain today, one who captured every single hero in America. Fortunately, I was able to win, but when I fought him and beat him, I could see there was no chance he was going to change, and I contemplated doing something that I hadn't done before. I contemplated killing him. Ultimately, I didn't, but it had me thinking more and more about what Anissa told me, that some people are going to need to die. Cecil also agreed with them as well, but still, I don't know if I made the right choice or not. I don't know if I should start killing people or not that are enemies. Debbie thought about what to say for a moment before she smiled as she then said, Currently, I think you are doing the right thing. Life is all precious. And the fact that you're trying to do everything you can in order to help people and change the world is such a noble thing, and I'm proud of you for it. In truth, I don't really know. I do think that life is all precious, but there are some people who are just threats to this world. Your father would have been better to ask for advice about this than me, but here's what I can say. So far, your gut has seemed to be right so many times. It was your gut and heart that allowed you to care for your father. It was you who was able to break the Viltrumite program that had been put into his head. So I think if you do trust in yourself, you'll be able to help more people. Though I'll say this as well. I partially agree with Cecil, but I also don't fully agree with him. Power is not the absolute way to solve things, but at the same time, you also will need to be able to spare people, see the good in people that most people can't. And that did help Invincible a lot. Now, it didn't really give him an answer, but at least it did give him some guidance. And with that, the two of them returned inside, having quite a bit of things to share about what had happened today. Several days would begin to pass since the Doc Seismic event, where things had mostly gone normal for Invincible. Between continuing his own training program, helping out with hero work, getting payments from the GDA, which was really going to help him and Adam Eve eventually move, and now he had a new task, training his little brother Oliver. Fortunately, because bonds hadn't been cut between him and Cecil, he had Cecil's support with doing so. However, one day while Invincible was flying around and practicing his maneuvers, two people approached him. And Invincible immediately recognized who these two people were. These were the two people who had escaped with the Declaration of Independence. And Invincible then said, "What do you guys want?" Before Dropkick said, "Not much. We need your help with something and you're the strongest person we can find." It's a pretty long story, but if you help us, we'll give back the Declaration of Independence. It's just the future is in danger. Invincible raised a brow upon hearing that. He said, "What do you mean the future is— Wait, are you guys time travelers?" Both of them looked to each other as they nodded, realizing they already had given away too much. As Fightmaster then said, "Yes, our future is ruled by somebody who's been oppressing us for several centuries now, and no one here can stand up to him, so please help us." Once Invincible heard that, he nodded. He was curious though at who this possible threat was, and a part of him wondered if he could do this without having to kill somebody. And the three of them traveled to the future, and they started to explain who their threat was. A man who had dictated the entire planet, who had killed every single person who was rebelling. While they started out as a good ruler, they had went completely mad. And the only way to return power to the people was to defeat him. But judging by how they were being described, it sounded like someone who had no chance to turn good. If Doc Seismic couldn't turn good, then what about him? Invincible shook his head. There had to be a way. There had to be a way to fix whoever this was. Unknown to them, though, there was also something else that had followed them through the time stream. A small drone was monitoring them, keeping itself cloaked and hidden for now, attaching itself to the time traveler's bike. That was when they were approached by several drones. Mark was about to attack, but Dropkick told him to go with it, as the drones arrested the three of them. And to Mark's surprise and shock, he ended up seeing the Immortal. And the Immortal looked confused upon seeing Mark. He looked younger, he looked thinner. And that armor, that outfit wasn't one he wore anymore. As he said, "Mark, is that you? It's been so long since the last time I've seen you. Are you at least the Mark I know, or are you another one?" Mark tilted his head a little bit as he said, "The Mark No, I'm not the Mark you know. I'm just younger. I do need to ask though, why are you doing all of this? Why are you hurting these people? What happened to you, Immortal?" The Immortal looked a little bit confused at the mention of time travel, but it was pretty clear he was a little bit crazy right now, so he didn't fully understand it. "After you left with your family and went to space, you left me in charge of the planet. Do you not remember? Millennia had passed since that day, so I guess I don't blame you for not remembering, but I can't do this anymore. I can't rule this planet. I've lost too many people. Everybody I used to know, everyone I used to love, I can no longer even remember who they are. So, I need you to end my life. Please, Mark, please kill me. That is the only way the power can ever be returned to the people." And that made Mark's eyes widen upon hearing that. The fact he wanted to die. The fact he wanted Mark to kill him. What had happened in this timeline to make it go this way? No, he knew exactly what happened. He was left alone to be the ruler. Still, though, he couldn't kill him. As he said, "I don't kill people. Killing is not the solution." The Immortal, though, was quick to interrupt as he said, "That is false and you know it. I've seen you kill several of the threats to our world, several of the threats to our planet. It was necessary, and you managed to lead the planet to greatness, and then you left me in charge. Your one blight, your one mistake." And that silenced Invincible for a couple of seconds, not because he agreed, because of something he realized in that moment. He was fated to eventually have to kill people. Him in the future had already realized that this path was wrong, or at least gained the belief, and he was now going on a separate path. But he shook his head. He couldn't believe that. He didn't want to believe that. He didn't want to believe that death was the only option for some people. As the Immortal continued to speak, "This is what I intended to become, a threat that could only be handled by being killed, so please kill me. I have become a threat to the world that cannot stop." Invincible then raised a brow as he said, "If you want to die so bad, just throw yourself at the sun. You don't need me to kill you." But the Immortal shook his head in disagreement as he yelled, "I can't die that method. I am the king. The king cannot die by his own hand. What type of pathetic king is that? The king needs to be defeated for power to be returned to the people. And if you won't do it by me asking, then I'll force you to." Before he flew right towards Invincible and landed a hard punch right on his face. However, it only sent Mark backwards by a couple of inches, before he landed a hard punch right on his stomach, sending him flying towards one of the walls as he said, "No, I am not going to kill you." Immortal slowly forced himself off of the wall. He had to admit that blow hurt. He was just as strong as he remembered. Though in truth, he never really did experience Invincible's full power. However, he could also tell something else. Even now, Invincible was still holding back. As Immortal then said, "Use your full power. That is the only way you can stop me. If you leave, things will only get worse for the people." Before he rushed towards Invincible, attempting to close the distance again and land another punch on his face, but this time Invincible was casually able to deflect out of the way before punching him in the neck. As Invincible floated backwards and said, "Please just let me help you." But before he could continue, Immortal rushed right towards him again. He already had recovered. "I've heard those words from you so many times before. Nothing but lies. Nothing I can trust. The only way this ends is death." As the Immortal began to release a rapid barrage of punches right onto Mark. Mark was just barely moving out of the way on time. Of course, he could have moved much faster, but he wasn't. Attacking Immortal clearly wasn't going to help in this situation. Plus, he just wanted to talk with him. As the Immortal then said, "Please, Mark, we were friends once. Grant me mercy and kill me, please." That was also when the door opened. As Invincible and the Immortal both saw Dropkick and Fight Master in the doorway. As the Immortal then said, "I will show you why you need to kill me, why I've become a monster," before rushing at full speed towards both Dropkick and Fight Master. However, before he could even reach, Invincible quickly closed them off, moving right in front of the Immortal and punching him back into the ground, as he said, "No, I'm not going to allow you to hurt them." A focus entered into Immortal's eyes as he said, "The type of hero that is held back by inaction from saving people is a type that gets more people dead in the long run. That was the mistake you made with so many others. With Doc Seismic, with Powerplex." The Immortal saying that was enough to catch Invincible off guard, leading the Immortal to once again rush right at Dropkick and Fight Master. At the last moment though, they were able to push each other out of the way. And right as Immortal moved in order to try and choke Dropkick, at the last moment Invincible was able to push him out of the way, slamming Immortal into a wall. Mark was angry, but more than that, he was starting to see what the Immortal meant. He wasn't someone who could be fixed, he wasn't someone who could be helped. He wanted death. And he was right. Mark had up to this point been showing in action. But he did say, "I'm sorry, my friend. I will make sure this doesn't happen to my Immortal." Before in a swift chop, he completely sliced off the Immortal's head. Invincible then looked over to Dropkick and Fight Master and said, "He's not dead. More like in a coma. Keep his head and his body away from him at all cost." However, there was something off that both of them were able to notice. Even though he had won the day and gotten their people freedom, he didn't look happy. It looked like emotions had been drained from his very soul. As Mark looked down to his blood-soaked hand for a moment, the blood that landed on his hand from chopping the Immortal. He then closed his fist. He had a promise he was going to uphold no matter what. No matter how this happened to the Immortal, it wouldn't happen to his own. As Cecil's words looped in his head again. And more importantly, Anissa's words looped through his head again. If the Viltrumite Empire was in control, would they have been able to stop something like this from happening? Maybe, but that was not for him to know. And everything was hitting for him at once. For the first time ever, he had fought against someone he needed to kill. He fought against someone that he knew killing was the only way they'd be able to be stopped. And from what he could tell, he would likely have to fight against others where that solution was the only way as well. And he didn't like it. This didn't feel satisfying whatsoever, especially because the Immortal was a friend. Life was still something to be valued. That was something he was certain about, but he had to force himself to accept that fact that some people were going to need to die. That some people were going to be threats to humanity. And some of those people weren't worth talking to. Some of those people were never going to change. But figuring out who those people that would change was going to be hard. He was starting to understand now that life wasn't some simple, easy game. You couldn't just kill your opponents, but you couldn't just save all of them as well. There was nothing that was simple about life. And with that, Dropkick and Fight Master brought Invincible back to his timeline like they promised. Both of them let him know they were going to make sure the future was going to be better and they'd never have to come back here again. And with that, both Dropkick and Fight Master left, returning back to the future for now. However, this also left Invincible with a lot to think about. Not just about how he was going to redefine his morals, but also about the person that the Immortal mentioned, somebody named Powerplex. Before he flew off, flying to the Pentagon for now and calling Cecil. He had a feeling Cecil might be the best person to call about this, though he wasn't too sure how he was even going to bring this up. Especially because of the fact that it just had been confirmed to him that time travel is an actual thing, and Invincible, for all he knew, just massively changed the future. That wasn't even something he was thinking about, the fact that he was now a new person in comparison to who he was intended to be. That was in the back of his mind right now as he began to fly over to the direction of the Pentagon. Meanwhile, in another dimension, a man was currently sitting down watching several screens. A man who was wearing a red cape as well as a hood. One of the few people capable of traveling the multiverse. One that had been wronged by another Invincible. Or at least in his mind had been wronged. Angstrom Levy. He had a plan to get revenge on that Mark's universe. While he still held the belief that every single Mark did turn evil, some of them did take a lot longer than others. This was one of the Marks that Angstrom Levy had set his eyes on to participate in something he called the Invincible War. Though convincing him to join his side was going to be a completely different matter, not to mention there was an even more difficult part of doing so. He planned to leave behind all the Invincibles he had recruited for the Invincible War in another dimension. But if they were strong enough to resist his technology, and more importantly, more unguarded enough in order to protect themselves, that wouldn't work. Most of all, this Mark didn't seem to be fully consumed by arrogance either. At the same time though, this one did seem a bit more easy to tempt. For now, Angstrom is going to wait and observe before making his next move. Worst case scenario, this just wasn't going to be a Mark he'd go for right now. As his attention returned to some of the other Marks. In deep space, on a planet that had just been conquered by the Viltrumite Empire, two Viltrumites were currently standing there. Floating above the sky and looking at their handiwork, those two Viltrumites were Anissa as well as Lucan. Normally Viltrumites operate on their own, but this planet was a little bit more of a threat, one they didn't feel like risking the life of a potential Viltrumite. Of course, they did have a good feeling that one Viltrumite would be enough, but just in case, better to be cautious. Fortunately for them, they were able to handle this. However, Anissa had something else she wanted to talk with Lucan about. I wanted to ask you, Lucan. I know you battled against Mark a while ago and he spared your life. So, why did he do such a thing? And what are your thoughts on the boy? That ended up catching Lucan completely off guard, though he wasn't fully surprised this was what the talk was about. After all, Anissa had been assigned to his planet first, though now that was out of her hands. Now it was Conquest who was going to go to that planet. As Lucan thought for a moment before he said, "The boy has potential. He was incredibly strong, and honestly wouldn't surprise me if he had surpassed his father by now. However, in spite of that, he has far too weak a mindset to ever properly become a Viltrumite. However, Conquest will most certainly straighten him out. Earth had made the boy weak. So weak that for some reason he chose to spare me, even though he had every opportunity to kill me." Anissa tapped her chin for a moment before she shook her head, as she said, "I don't quite agree that the boy is weak. Naive, yes. A fool, yes. But not weak. He is on the verge of becoming like us. He's on the verge of having a similar morality to the Viltrumites. I just hope Conquest will be enough to straighten him out, or he'll be straightened out by time Conquest does arrive. Though truth be told, it wouldn't surprise me if he'd already learned that lesson. And once he does, it's only a matter of time until he becomes more and more like us." And Lucan nodded, though there was still some conflict brewing within him. Sure, a part of him still felt that Mark was weak, but at the same time, it wasn't like he wanted to die either. For the past few months, he had been thinking about this. He had been thinking about how he felt. Though most of it he was trying to suppress. He was still alive, which meant he could still be serving the Viltrumite Empire. It was Mark's weakness that spared him. Or as how Anissa was framing it, Mark being so naive. But a question was now starting to form in the back of his head. Was this really him being naive? Was that mercy really a weakness? He shook those thoughts off for now, as both Anissa and Lucan suddenly got a distraction, an alert. The Viltrumite prison that was containing Nolan had been broken out of. Alan, Nolan, as well as another prisoner known as Battle Beast had escaped. Furthermore, two Viltrumites were also found dead at the site. Things were changing at a faster rate than either of them could really have predicted, and now there was a callback for both of them to return back to Viltrum at once to prepare their next moves. And with that, the both of them took off, flying back towards planet Viltrum as some of the Viltrumite ships began to fly in, technology they used in order to make the planet theirs. We now return back to the GDA, as Issa looks up to the ceiling, currently taking in all the information that Mark had just given him. Okay, let me get this straight. You just went to the future, killed the Immortal who apparently was ruling over our planet because you put him in charge of the planet, which that in itself is confusing. For what I think are obvious reasons, none of this is going to leave our office ever. Because now we have to prepare for the possibility of not just threats from now, but also the future, and the fact the multiverse exists. And I don't mean like alternate dimensions like the Flaxen portals, but I mean like alternate timelines, which now I'm gonna have to classify. This is gonna be a pain. Sorry about that, kid. Okay, I can focus on that later. So, yeah. Invincible then shook his head as he said, "Don't worry, it's fine, I get it. Like, I'm still coming to terms with the fact that time travel is an actual thing, and confirmed to now exist. And we have a multiverse in that way too, but yeah." Cecil then moved a hand onto Mark's shoulder as he then asked, "So, you had to kill the Immortal because he became corrupt and took over the planet, and basically enslaved everybody. So, that's clearly one shit way to start your day. How do you feel about that? Because not just was that your first time actually having to kill somebody, it was also somebody you knew really well." That led to another sigh coming from Mark before he said, "I think I finally do understand what you guys mean. Or, well, I understood before, but I agree now. Seeing what the Immortal had become, seeing that he became a threat that never was going to change, that had no chance at redemption, that death was the only answer. It showed me that people can be like that. If heroes, people who had always been heroes, can turn into monsters like that, there are certainly going to be more people like that. I have no intention to always fight to kill either. I still think life is precious, but I'm going to be a lot more willing to kill. Only after I can guarantee that death is the only option for them. I don't think them being strong is enough for me to say they are a threat where death is the only option, but if they are truly evil, then I will kill them. For example, if Doc Seismic does break out of prison again, I will kill him next time." And Cecil nodded as he said, Good, I'm happy to hear that, but you still ignored the question. I didn't ask you what you learned, I asked how you felt. Though it's okay if you don't have an answer. You just went through something even more complex than most people ever have to go through." And Mark took a moment to contemplate how he felt about it, to contemplate what to say, before saying, "I hated it. I hate killing, and I still do hate doing so. Even though I objectively won, even though I saved the future, I don't quite feel like that. I'm just not really happy there wasn't another way to do it. So I'm going to continue working, trying my best to figure out a way to make it so a world like that doesn't come to be. Try and figure out a way where unnecessary killing like this doesn't have to happen. Though I also know my power isn't going to be the answer to that either. Truth be told, I'm not quite sure what the answer is going to be to finding this world, but I'm going to find it no matter what. I'm going to make sure that this is not going to have to happen ever again." And Cecil couldn't help but smile upon hearing that. This was different. Mark wasn't searching for a simple answer like getting stronger anymore. He understood that that wasn't the answer. He was starting to understand that people were a lot more complicated, but also that not everybody needed to die either. He wasn't going down the full path of a Viltrumite. And more than that, he still ultimately wanted to be a hero. He still ultimately wanted to help people and prevent things like this from happening again. This led Cecil to patting him on the shoulder before saying, "I'd recommend getting some rest for tonight. If I'm being honest, I think you need it. You can also take tonight off from hero work. You're not going to be operating at your best right now. Instead, have fun. You're still young. So try your best not to focus on this all day, okay?" And with that, Invincible nodded before flying out. He felt much better after this conversation. He felt he had realized things about himself that he couldn't realize before. And he felt he was doing the right thing. Or at least he was going down the right path. Only time and results would be able to tell. After Mark left, Cecil began to head towards the White Room. Right now, he was feeling conflicted. He did have a lot more trust in Mark now because of his new ideology, but at the same time he wasn't fully sure he could trust him yet. Truth be told, he wasn't sure he could ever trust him. However, there's something else Cecil was more concerned about, as he looked over to Donald and said, "The headpiece was still recording everything that was going on in that conversation, even in the future, right?" Donald nodded, which did remind him of something, as he said, "There was something else that was a little bit more troubling that we needed to talk about that we got from the headphones. While it's nice to know we're going to succeed in the future, considering that future even happened to begin with, there's something else we learned. Immortal made an interesting implication, that there were more Marks, that there was more than one Invincible. But more importantly, the fact we even know about that to begin with, that means it likely is going to happen at some point in the future." That caused a sigh to come out from Cecil before he said, "Good to know. Continue up with our preparations." How is recreation and integration of Doc Seismic's kaiju into the reaniman going? Calling Donald to bring up one of the tablets, he said, "Good so far." The fact that our Earth had beasts like this was really impressive to me. Their bodies were incredibly durable. Not to mention, we're figuring out ways to introduce more lethal injections of the poison, in order to make it more immediate. Finally, we're also working on ways to use the webs that we had gained from Doc Seismic's spiders in order to use as containment methods. If those webs are strong enough to contain every single hero on the planet, well, that'll definitely be strong enough for us and our purposes. Cecil nodded as he said, "Good. We'll make sure even more successful future comes. That is something I'm certain about." Also flag the name Powerplex. In case that name ever comes up again, I want to be ready for it. After Invincible's events in the future, both Cecil and Invincible had become aware of another villain that was strong enough to be mentioned in the same breath as Doc Seismic. Considering Doc Seismic was the same villain who was able to take out nearly every single hero in America and capture them, this is something to definitely keep in mind. This villain's name was Powerplex. However, they only had gotten the name directly from Immortal. They had no idea who he was or what his abilities was. They also had to confirm that the multiverse did exist. Several marks were out there. Though it was information that slipped past Invincible's mind, it didn't slip past Cecil's. However, even though they only had gotten the name, they had no idea where to start, aside from one member of the GDA who did know exactly who Powerplex was. And this member was of course Powerplex himself, currently not known as that, instead known as Scott Duvall. And he was suddenly thankful that he got that information when he did. He still wanted revenge, of course, against Invincible, blaming him completely for the loss of his niece, as well as the loss of his sister. Still, one thing was clear was his original plan was more than likely not going to work, especially because of the fact that he had failed in the future. So he was going to need to think of something different, some way to kill Invincible and get revenge. It was especially problematic right now because of the fact that Invincible was still held under Cecil's protection. And considering everything they were doing right now, there was no way they were going to go against him. Powerplex was making a plan in order to steal the power amplifiers from the GDA, but he couldn't do so yet. Maybe it could be possible for him to replicate that technology. He still wanted to take Invincible head on. Currently he was out in the wasteland practicing with his powers, however that was when a portal opened up behind him. He immediately was on guard as sparks rose out from his body before the voice said, "Relax, I'm not here to hurt you." And the man who stepped out was Angstrom Levy, as he said, "In fact, I'm actually here to help you." See, the both of us have been wronged by Mark Grayson, by Invincible. And I've been looking for more people like me who hate him, and I know you do. Which that one caught Powerplex completely off guard, as he said, who are you? And a smile slowly began to creep onto Angstrom as he said, "Who I am doesn't matter. I'm a friend who doesn't like Invincible, who wants Invincible in every universe dead. Oh, right, I guess I shouldn't have said that part. I'm from the multiverse. And I'm here to help you out with something you want more than anything. Mark Grayson to be killed." Which is when a robot began to step out, one that was carrying a case. Inside here is some upgraded gear from another dimension that a version of you wore. Don't worry about that other version of you though, it's an older version of his armor, but it would more than definitely get the job done. Not just a version of the technology that you want to steal from the GDA or replicate, but it also is enhanced by reaniman technology, using the same things that they use in order to enhance their physical bodies. However, that's only part of what I have in store. The first thing we need to do though is set things back on track. A lot of the marks by this point would actually be separated from the GDA. For example, in another reality of the Doc Seismic situation, Invincible wasn't actually strong enough to beat Doc Seismic. He ended up getting captured and poisoned by one of the centipedes. As a result of that, they needed to be rescued by the reaniman. That led to a falling out between Cecil and Mark, resulting in Mark no longer being with the organization, and also going with a blue suit. But right now, their bond managed to stay the same. This Invincible was strong enough to be able to defeat Doc Seismic completely on his own. And he's only growing stronger and stronger. But I have a plan to separate him from the GDA. And once I do, you can eliminate him and fight him. Just wait for your signal, alright? I wish you the best of luck, Powerplex. And with that, Angstrom was preparing to go back for the portal, before we looked over to Powerplex and said, "Do you have any questions?" Powerplex looked up to him for a moment before shaking his head no. He couldn't help but admit he was being filled to the brim with excitement from this, finally the chance to get revenge on Invincible. Even more than that, from what he could tell from Angstrom, there might be a chance to kill more of them, as he said, "If possible, after we're done with this, can I join you on taking out the other Invincibles too?" Angstrom couldn't help but smile a bit more as he nodded and said, "Glad to have met you, my new business partner," before going through his dimension, leaving Powerplex here for now. However, after he left, a thought was now going into Powerplex's head. Was he strong enough to take Invincible on right now? He couldn't help but wonder that. After all, with this new gear, and him being a near-perfect counter to Invincible, he felt he might stand a pretty good chance. Still, this was something he was going to need to wait on for now. Inside of the other dimension, though, there was also somebody else who was waiting for Angstrom. The man was another variant of Invincible, one who had joined the Viltrumite Empire, and one who was being completely silent. He was the second part of their plan. And if this worked, if they could get this Mark on their side as well for the Invincible War, Angstrom was certain of one thing: Mark most definitely would be dead. All it would take was ruining this Invincible's life to make him susceptible for the deal. Fortunately, he knew exactly how he was going to do it. Mark then would have returned home from his meeting with Cecil. While he was feeling a little bit better in comparison to before, he still wasn't feeling the best. After all, he had still killed somebody he considered a friend. He was still unable to help somebody he had considered a friend. However, when he did arrive, he did see somebody else was here that he wasn't expecting. Alongside Debbie and Oliver, there was also Eve, here to enjoy dinner with them for now. And they looked over to Mark, immediately asking if he was okay. After all, he was home a lot later than they expected. And Mark told them, "It's a long story, but I am definitely feeling a lot better than I was before. Before and earlier in the day, I mean." And he told them all about everything. He knew he could trust his family. So he told them about the future he had gone to, the future where the Immortal had turned evil, the future where he apparently abandoned the Earth, and how he had to kill somebody for the first time, and the new ideology he was going to approach being a superhero with. Which they were rather happy to hear that Mark got the right lesson from this. He didn't get the lesson that he needed to kill every single one of his opponents, but he got the lesson that he needed to make sure when he was going to kill someone, they were someone who needed to die. And with that, they all went to sleep for now, resting in order to prepare for the big days ahead of them. Little did Invincible know, that test of his morality was going to be coming much sooner than he thought. Out in space, a Viltrumite was coming to Earth, a little bit earlier than he was supposed to be. But after hearing the strength of the boy that was on the planet, one that might rival Nolan, and with the amount of time he had to grow, he couldn't help but be a little bit more excited and head to the planet a little bit faster than normal. That person, of course, being Conquest, the Viltrumite that Anissa had warned him about. By Conquest's estimation, he was going to be 2 weeks earlier than he thought initially, as he smiled a bit and said, "Hopefully you can be just as entertaining as your father is." At the same time, a massive portal began to opening high above the ocean. And out from the portal, a beast similar to that of the Depth Dweller rose out. However, this one was much larger, able to tower over skyscrapers. Cecil was of course able to immediately detect it. As he first contacted Atlantis, he thought that maybe Atlantis had something to do with it, but no, they had never once seen a Depth Dweller that big before. Based on their scans of the beast though, Invincible might be the only one capable of taking it on. Though Cecil knew that just in case, he was most certainly going to have to prepare the reaniman. He was just hoping that Invincible was going to be enough. Just in case as well, they did also call in the Immortal to act as backup, as Invincible, Immortal, and Adam Eve all arrived at the scene in order to fight against the Depth Dweller. Invincible in particular having some pretty bad memories about this thing. He remembered its sound waves hurting like hell. But he also knew this was a wild animal, so he more than likely would have to put it down. It wasn't something that could turn good. Something that both the Immortal as well as Adam Eve were aware of. So they all knew they were going to have to be careful against a kaiju like this. For the Immortal, he felt this might be a chance to redeem himself. After all, he needed to be saved by Invincible from Doc Seismic. Adam Eve was in a similar boat, though this wasn't really pride for her. It was more just she wanted to fight alongside Invincible. There were also several jets from the GDA in preparation as well in order to offer some backup. Little did they know, inside of the water there was also a drone watching them, observing their every movements. Adam Eve would make the first move as she lifted up her hands and created several pink chains, wrapping them around the Depth Dweller's arms. Though she was straining herself even doing that, the beast was absolutely massive, so having to make chains like that size, that was a pain. Immortal and Invincible took their chances. Invincible did have to slow himself down a little bit so both him and the Immortal could both land a punch right on the Depth Dweller's face, causing the Depth Dweller to be pushed back by tens of feet. But then the Depth Dweller forcefully broke one of the chains and began to slam its hand towards both Invincible and the Immortal. And while Invincible was able to move out of the way at the last moment, Immortal wasn't, as Immortal was slammed deep into the ocean. A look of worry entered onto Invincible's face as he began to fly towards the ocean. At the same time, the Depth Dweller was preparing to launch another attack at Invincible, but before it could, it felt several bullets begin to land on its arm. Energy bullets that were utilized by the GDA. Still, they were only annoying it. They weren't causing any damage to the Depth Dweller whatsoever. As the Depth Dweller looked towards several jets beginning to fly around it, and it opened its mouth. It was about to try and fire out a sound attack right towards them, but before it could, it felt a large pillar land on its head. Adam Eve was defending them, giving the jets the necessary time in order to move out the way and scatter. Immortal coughed up a bit of water after being freed from the ocean thanks to Invincible. And Immortal said, "Be careful, that thing's physical hits are no joke. It's stronger than dock-seismic centipedes." Invincible nodded as he looked up towards the beast, trying to figure out a way to win this fight. He looked over to the Immortal and asked, "Do you think you're still going to be capable of fighting or no?" And the Immortal nodded as he said, "Come on, have more faith in me. One hit isn't going to be enough to take me out of this battle." And Invincible nodded as both him and the Immortal began to fly towards it, Invincible near immediately picking up speed as he landed a punch right on the Depth Dweller's face, before following that up by slamming both of his hands right down onto its head. At the same time, Immortal flew right behind its spine and landed a hard punch right onto it. The Depth Dweller was able to immediately tell, though, between the two people attacking it, Invincible was the only threat to it. If it could kill Invincible, it would be able to kill everybody else. So after it restabilized its footing, it began to rapidly spin around, forcing the Immortal off of its back and slamming both of its claws right into Invincible. The raw amount of power that Invincible was just hit with was off the charts, surpassing that of the Hail Mary. That was something Invincible was able to handle, though it was mainly just made to be set up for another move. As while Invincible was being sent backwards, the Depth Dweller opened its mouth and sent its sonic attack right towards Invincible, forcing Invincible to go through an immense amount of pain as he put both of his hands on his ears, before it was followed up by its claw slamming Invincible right down into the ocean. Adam Eve, the Immortal, and the Jets all began to rapid fire on the Depth Dweller, Immortal trying to punch its spine, Adam Eve launching several pillars towards it, while the Jets were firing, but it was focused, trying to kill Invincible. As Invincible felt each claw strike land right on its body, every single last one of them, and a memory came back to his head. That memory of Omniman beating him into that mountain, letting hit after hit, punch after punch on him. As a focus and rage entered into his eyes, he would have yelled if it wasn't for the fact he was stuck underwater right now. He overcame the pain that he was currently feeling, as Invincible clapped his hands together, sending a shockwave so massive that it forced the Depth Dweller to be forced out of the water, sending it tens, no hundreds of meters high up into the air. The shockwave and wave of water were enough to send the helicopters, Adam Eve, and even Immortal away, before he began to rocket right towards the Depth Dweller, flying at speeds that the GDA had never tracked him at, as he landed another punch right onto the Depth Dweller's face, this time sending it even higher up into the sky. And right as he was about to try and land another punch on it, the Depth Dweller opened its mouth again, and sent another one of those sound attacks right towards Invincible. And while it slowed him down, he was still pushing, before Depth Dweller opened its mouth even further and went all out, sending a full sound wave right towards him, disorienting Invincible for just long enough for the Depth Dweller to use its claw to grab onto Invincible as they were both falling down towards the earth again. And thanks to the disorientation, there wasn't anything Invincible could do, as he was slammed down hard back into the ocean, causing him to cough up quite a bit of blood, and disorienting him in the process. However, right as the Depth Dweller was about to attempt to land another blow onto Invincible, several sounds of the teleporter began to go off, as 5 newly upgraded reanimen appeared right in front of them, all of them landing a blow right onto the Depth Dweller's face at once. But they had a new plating, one that was more orange in color, the same color as the centipedes the Doc Seismic were utilizing. Invincible's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. The reanimen, what are they doing here? How did the teleporter? In his mind, he realized rather fast exactly what was happening. The GDA, they were using DA Sinclair. But he focused for a moment. The Depth Dweller was still the much greater threat up to this point, and he was going to be necessary to taking it out. Whatever the reason why the reanimen were still here, whatever the reason why DA Sinclair was working with Cecil could wait. There was also the fact that he couldn't ignore, the fact he would have been dead if the reaniman hadn't arrived. Still, he wasn't happy to see them, as he flew out from the ocean and prepared himself as well. And as Invincible began to fly up from the water, he saw several pods begin to make their way over. 10 of them all at once, each of them containing a reaniman. The 5 of them that were already here began to rapidly attack the Depth Dweller, landing several blows. Each and every single one of the blows that they landed were causing some small amount of damage onto it. But Invincible focused as he had a memory back to Anissa, how Anissa had handled the kaiju, by flying right through its brain at full speed. So he focused, flying higher and higher into the sky while at the same time the reaniman were stalling, keeping it distracted for now. Before he accelerated further and further, getting faster and faster before he accelerated to full speed and went right through the brain of the Depth Dweller, killing it in a singular shot. This normally would have been a lot more difficult if it wasn't for all the damage done to its head specifically up to this point, but still, the beast had now fallen. And before Adam, Eve, or the Immortal could say anything, Invincible looked towards the direction of where the Pentagon was. Invincible needed to have another talk with Cecil, and he immediately took off, flying right towards that direction, as he said, "Cecil, I'm coming over to the base. We need to talk now." Knowing Cecil was still listening, Angstrom was watching through that with a smirk on his face. He had to admit he was impressed that it worked. Maybe he should visit that dimension more often. That dimension was an intriguing one. It was one where Atlantis was a lot more involved with the surface development in comparison to normal, leading to several of the sea creatures mutating in different ways. But that wasn't important for now. He then also sent a message over to powerplex as he said, "It's almost time. Just wait for the after effects of this meeting." powerplex smirked as he said, "Good, I'll get myself ready." Invincible landed at the Pentagon and walked inside, not really destroying anything on his way in, as he flew towards Cecil's office. Fortunately, Cecil was already standing outside of his office waiting for him. This was a gamble that Cecil was about to take, but he felt it could be worth it, especially with what had just happened in the future. Maybe talking could actually work. As Invincible asked him, "How long? How long has D.A. Sinclair been working with you, and what other criminals do you have that work under you?" Cecil sighed as he then said, "I took him in the moment you defeated him. But with how weak our planet is in comparison to the Viltrumites, and with D.A. Sinclair being able to create the Reaniman, one of the only few things that were able to rival a Viltrumite that were on the planet, we needed that technology. But more than that, I saw a chance to redeem somebody. I saw a chance to make somebody better. I'm not happy about having to work with that scumbag, don't get me wrong. But we needed as much backup as we can. We're still behind in comparison to the Viltrumite Empire, especially with what is to come in the future, with what Anissa warned us about. I have a lot of faith in you, kid, don't get me wrong, but I know better than to have faith in just one thing and make sure it works." And Invincible closed his fist for a moment. He was tempted to lash out. He was angry, but at the same time, this was somebody who was given a chance at redemption. A chance to become better and a chance to use his talents for the better. A judgment that he was going to have to learn, something that Cecil was already skilled at doing. But then he thought more about it as he said, "How can you forgive someone like that? He didn't just kill people, he forcefully kidnapped them and turned them into monsters." And Cecil shook his head as he said, "I think you misunderstand. I'm not forgiving him. I'm giving him a chance to do something better with his talents. The people we have now that are Reaniman are soldiers of the GDA that have passed on, soldiers of the military that want to be able to give their people one last fight, and now we're able to give them that. I'm still holding him accountable for his crimes, I'm just making sure they can be repaid." As Invincible took a breath in and a breath out, right now he was on a unique path. He was trying to figure out if his judgment was right. He was trying to figure out if this was something he could agree with Cecil on. He wasn't going to attack Cecil, but at the same time, he didn't know. He looked conflicted. As he told him, "Please leave me alone for a bit. I need to think." Cecil opened his mouth about to say something before closing it as he nodded. And Invincible flew out. Didn't go as good as he could have hoped, but did certainly go better than he was expecting. The worst way this could have gone was Invincible being turned to an enemy. However, Cecil did decide that he was going to respect this for now. He was still going to observe Invincible, but he knew talking to him wasn't going to work either. Though the one who was most surprised at this all was Angstrom. He was expecting a massive fallout between the two of them, not this. However, the steps had at least been laid for now. He felt there was a good chance right now that powerplex might still be effective, especially because of his connection to the GDA. So, he decided to send the signal over to powerplex. Invincible was starting to fly back, still conflicted in thoughts after his discussion with Cecil. Still conflicted on how he felt about the fact they were using DA Sinclair, that they were using criminals in order to assist them. But at the same time, he wanted to give people redemption, and while he knew he had a personal history with Sinclair, why was he still so angry about this? This was exactly what he wanted. Hell, it could even be a sign that maybe what he wanted was the right cause. But he knew exactly why. He couldn't just let that go. It was one thing to forgive someone who didn't affect his life personally. It was one thing to forgive someone who, while they were evil, they weren't an enemy to his life personally, didn't affect him personally. But D.A. Sinclair was different. He almost resulted in William's death, and that wasn't exactly something he could just forgive. But at the same time, Cecil was also not telling him to forgive it either. Just telling him to give him a chance. However, as he was flying, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted, as a portal opened above him. At that same time, Angstrom sent powerplex a signal that now was the time to go. As out from the portal, something landed in front of Invincible. Something that Invincible was very familiar with, though it wasn't quite his. It was an alternate universe Hail Mary. At the last moment, Invincible was able to move several people out of the way before the kaiju landed on them, just narrowly saving their lives, as he thought to himself, what the hell was going on? Before telling the people that they needed to evacuate now, as Mark suddenly felt a tentacle wrap around his leg and slam him into one of the cars, causing it to completely break. Though Invincible did smile a little bit, the Hail Mary's blows hurt a lot more, but it wasn't like this kaiju was weaker. No, Invincible was just stronger. But he knew he couldn't run away right now. He wanted to lure it away. He needed a clear path to lure it away to where there wouldn't be that many civilians. But he didn't have that much time to think, as suddenly a large bolt of lightning hit Mark straight in the back. And powerplex floated down, explaining to Mark he was here to punish him and hold him accountable for the lives that he and his father had taken during their battle, with the assistance of this creature. Invincible's eyes widened as he looked over to them. He wasn't expecting this today, but a part of him couldn't help but question for a moment if maybe he was right. But then he shook it off. No, he still had people he needed to help. He still had people he needed to protect. Besides, both of them were now putting lives in danger, just for the sake of getting revenge. As he then said, "Are you aware of what you're doing? You're putting people in danger, just for your own sake. You're risking the lives of so many others. I understand if you hate me, really I do, but I can't let you hurt innocent people. Please just surrender now." As Powerplex chuckled a bit before he then said, "Me? Hurting innocent people? Please, I'm the one who's holding you accountable. I'm the one avenging the lives that you and your father killed." Before he pointed forward as the Hail Mary launched out its tentacles right towards Mark, while at the same time Powerplex floated up higher in the air, and Invincible closed his fists together as he punched away several of the tentacles, trying his best to deflect them away from himself without hitting buildings, before he lifted up both his arms in order to block as a bolt of lightning came right towards him from Powerplex. Though this was most certainly not ordinary lightning. No, it was potent, powerful. How did he manage to get something this powerful? As Invincible was launched hard into the ground, causing another crater to be formed. Before he felt the tentacle wrap around his leg again and throw him high into the air, as Powerplex flew right towards him and attempted to land a punch right onto his face, but Invincible was fast enough to catch the punch this time, and let a hard gut punch right onto Powerplex's gut. And while Powerplex was launched backwards, a smile rose onto him, as the sparks increased before he launched himself right towards Invincible and did a hard punch right on his face. This punch launched Invincible right through one of the buildings. As Invincible blinked, wiping off some blood from his nose, he wasn't that strong before. Powerplex opened and closed his hands. He had to admit this was wonderful, the level of amplification. He really had to thank Angstrom for this later. Little did he know, Angstrom was already watching this, watching with an amused look on his face. Currently though, he was controlling the kaiju. It was almost like playing a video game. Though he did have to give the idea that Powerplex was the one in control of it for now, he ultimately wanted to ruin this Mark's life, and make him much more susceptible for the deal he wanted to make. He just needed to make sure Invincible was in a worse place mentally. Fortunately, Powerplex was certainly helping with that so far. Next to Angstrom was one of the Mark variants, watching this rather intrigued. As the kaiju continued to chase after Mark, while at the same time Powerplex floated down as he said, "You are no hero. You're a monster who ended tens of thousands of lives in your battle with your father. And I'm just gonna give you exactly what you deserve. Before Invincible had one of his legs be wrapped around by a tentacle once more, and he was thrown right back into the direction of the city. That did actually catch Powerplex a little bit off guard, as he looked over to the kaiju and said, "Be careful now. We still don't want random people to be harmed." Invincible then forcefully stopped himself as he looked down towards the beast. That was the bigger threat out of the two of them. Though there was also Powerplex. For some reason he had just gotten stronger. It could very well be possible he was just holding back in comparison to now. He was going to have to use a lot more power against both. At that same time, back at the Pentagon, Cecil suddenly got a call about what was happening. Where did that kaiju even come from? Cecil had spent a long while looking for more kaiju similar to the Hail Mary, but he wasn't able to ever find anything. However, now there was a similar kaiju that just appeared out of nowhere? Why? And who was that man? Wait, that was Scott Duvall. But that level of technology, it was one they hadn't seen yet. It was similar to the power amplifier disc they were developing, but it wasn't like the normal ones. No, it was much more developed, much more advanced. How long did he have this tech? That he needed to go there and help him soon. Though he made a call over to somebody else, he felt the reanimate would be useless against someone like Powerplex. So he made a call to a hero he felt might be good for this type of job, calling Adam Eve to head over soon. Powerplex didn't give Mark a chance to think, as lightning surrounded his fist, before he rocketed himself right towards Invincible's direction and attempted to land a punch right onto his cheek again. However, Invincible slid underneath that punch and palm struck him straight in the gut as he said, "You know, you really are quite predictable." And right as he was about to land another punch onto his stomach, he felt a tentacle wrap around his arm, before the kaiju threw Invincible right towards one of the buildings. And Invincible could hear it. There were people inside that building, so at the last moment he forced himself to stop, just barely managing to do so, as he thought to himself, "No, I won't let this be another Chicago incident." As Powerplex rocketed right towards him, instead moving underneath him in order to uppercut him hard in the jaw. The force of his lightning resulting in that being even greater as he was sent high into the air, before Powerplex fired lightning out from his feet, intentionally missing civilians as he launched himself towards Invincible. Invincible then clapped his hands together, using that to launch Powerplex right towards the ground again, before he then said, "I get you're still mad at me, but let's not do this in this city, please." Powerplex then rocketed right towards him again, moving even faster and even stronger in comparison to last time, as he said, "The only one that's putting people in risk right now is you, so if you want to stop putting people at risk, just accept your punishment and die." And that caused a focus to enter into Invincible's eyes, before he dodged another punch of lightning. And he looked down towards the kaiju that was trying to reach at them but couldn't thanks to their height. And he dodged another punch from Powerplex. He was starting to figure out what Powerplex's powers were, but then he heard the kaiju starting to head towards the city. It was starting to move, and it was trying to head towards more civilians. Powerplex quickly saw his chance. He slammed both of his fists right down onto Invincible's back, launching Invincible down at quite a fast speed, faster than he had felt before. At the same time, the kaiju finally grabbed onto Invincible and slammed him down towards a group of people. Invincible wasn't going to be able to stop himself this time, but at the last moment they were all pulled away by several pink threads, as Invincible was slammed into the ground, but Adam Eve floated down, arriving. Angstrom was watching that with an intrigued face, as Powerplex said, "That wasn't supposed to happen, wasn't it? Wasn't this just supposed to be a 1-on-2? Angstrom chuckled a bit as he said, don't worry. I'm going to make sure you can still fight Invincible like I said. Just focus on Invincible. Leave Adam Eve to me." As Invincible smiled over to Adam Eve and said, "Okay, I definitely owe you for saving me again. That guy has lightning powers, but from what I can tell, every time he gets hit, he seems to get stronger, so be careful. And his tech is really the main issue. It's beyond most of the things I've seen on this planet. Leave the kaiju to me. I was able to beat it once in the past, so I should be able to beat this one as well." Adam Eve nodded as she looked towards the two of them, preparing to fly after Powerplex, before another portal opened. Adam Eve and Mark had confusion rise onto their face. The only time they really ever saw a portal open was the Flaxen invasion. But this one felt different. It didn't feel like the Flaxens. As out from the portal, something familiar came out. What looked like a massive centipede, similar to the ones that Doc Seismic was using, as it flew right towards Adam Eve's direction. At the same time, Powerplex launched down a large bolt of lightning right towards Mark, as Mark lifted up both of his arms in order to block, while at the same time Adam Eve lifted up her hands, creating a shield out of pink energy, using that in order to block against the centipede. But even with that in mind, she was pushed back quite a bit, As Powerplex then said, Invincible, the longer and longer you continue to punish the people of the world by existing, the more and more people will get hurt. So accept your fate and die. That is the only way that you can possibly hope to repent. Though while Powerplex was only really aiming to cause damage to buildings, the other beast wasn't. As Angstrom then activated a command, and the kaiju, instead of attacking Invincible, looked towards the city and began to run towards it, as it wrapped its tentacles around several buildings, beginning to launch them towards more populated parts of the city, towards areas that people were running away from the kaiju. This caught Invincible and even Powerplex off guard, but they were too late, as Powerplex was forced to watch several buildings ram through several people all at once, tens, if not hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, all dying in that single moment. The screams of those people, they could be heard echoing all throughout the area. Powerplex was left stunned. What had he done? He wasn't thinking straight. He should have never made a deal with Angstrom. But for Invincible, flashes of memories went through his head. An image back on Fraxa of the Viltrumites destroying several Fraxans, ramming through their buildings and cities, but more importantly, an image of his battle against his father, and the amount of damage he was intentionally causing to teach Mark a lesson. Invincible shook for a moment, rage filling his body. Again, he wasn't strong enough. Again, he wasn't able to save the people he cared about. Again, he wasn't able to save people. No more. Not again. As at full speed, he rushed right past the centipede, going right through its brain and killing it in a single blow, saving Adam Eve from having to fight it as Adam Eve looked worried, this rage erupting from Mark. It wasn't one she had seen in a long while, but it was pure fury, as he flew right towards the kaiju and punched it straight into the street. This strength enough to launch it down without any issue. As it tried to get up again, Mark grabbed onto one of the power lines, remembering this is one of the kaiju's weaknesses. And then he slammed both the sparking power lines right into the kaiju, defeating it and killing the kaiju once and for all. Several reanimen also began to teleport around the area, as Mark breathed in and out before saying, "A little too late." But he wasn't done yet, as he flew right towards Powerplex and slammed him hard into the ground. Powerplex was left stunned for a moment before he tried to fight back against Mark, his rage and hatred towards him still there, though at the same time it was wavering, as he tried to release as much electricity as he could, trying to force Mark off of him. But even in spite of that, it wasn't enough, as Powerplex panted, completely out of energy before Invincible lifted him up by the head, using his other hand to hold back both of his arms, forcing him to look towards the city, the destruction that was caused, the several lives, the people that were put down, as he said, "This is what happened because you got consumed by revenge. This is what happened because you so recklessly went on a path for revenge. These people that died, they're on your fucking hands just as much as they're on mine." Tears began to go down Powerplex's face as he said, I just wanted to make sure you got punished like you deserved." Invincible took a breath in and a breath out as he said, "Do you think I asked for this? Do you think I asked for the people that you lost to be killed? I was doing everything I could to try and save as many lives as possible, but I am haunted each and every day with the thousands of lives that I couldn't save. It is why I've constantly been growing stronger and stronger in order to make sure a tragedy like that could never happen again. It's why I'm trying to make sure the world ends up being a better place. I understand that you hate me, really I do, but believe me, I hate myself so much more than you could possibly understand. But I'm using that in order to make sure the world can be better. And it's why I'm not going to kill you either." As Powerplex's eyes widened upon hearing that, looking over to Mark for a second as he said, "Why? I deserve to die." And Mark shook his head as he said, No, you don't. You were playing with fire that you didn't understand the true power of. I could see you were trying your best to make sure people lived. Just wherever you got that from, that person truly doesn't care. That person is against you. That person's against everybody. You never should have trusted them." Mark had already figured out that the portals, the kaiju, didn't come from Powerplex. It had to have come from somebody else. And it was starting to all click in Powerplex's head. This was the plan of the man he had made a deal with. He was going to ruin Mark's life. As Powerplex slowly said, "I'm sorry." Not to Invincible, no. He was saying it to the people that had died because of him. The people that had died because he had let himself get consumed by revenge. As Invincible then said, "Good. Use that in order to make sure something like this never happens again. That's exactly why I'm not going to kill you. I think you can be better. I think you can do better. The people who die because of you, their blood will always be on your hand, similar to how it's going to be on mine, but the only thing we can do is move forward. The only thing we can do is make things better for the others. As three of the reanimate approach, and Invincible handed powerplex off to them. And Invincible looked towards the destroyed city for a moment. He honestly didn't know what to do right now. After all, this still was ultimately his fault. Before Adam Eve could reach him, Invincible took off again, this time flying off to somewhere where he felt he could be alone. He just wanted to think right now. A smirk slowly rose onto Angstrom. The plan had worked as he had hoped. He just needed to make sure Invincible was in as worse of a state as possible mentally, in order for him to make the deal. The Mark variant that was also watching stood with his arms crossed. In truth, a part of him did actually feel bad for his alternate self. While several Marks had turned evil, not all of them fully enjoyed it. This was one of the Marks that didn't. Angstrom then opened a portal for the Mark variant, as he told him, "Go convince your other self." And he nodded before flying through the portal. Angstrom was also going to watch this rather carefully in case this didn't work. Worst case scenario, he just ended up losing 2 potential Marks. It wasn't like this was the only Viltrumite Mark that he had acquired. Invincible right now was just staring at the ocean, sitting at a cliff he found where he could be alone. Thinking back on the actions that had happened today, he felt he had made the right choice about sparing Powerplex, but at the same time, why did this have to happen? And a part of him also wondered, how did this change from the future timeline? From what he knew originally, based on how Immortal worded it, he ended up killing Powerplex, but this time he was already able to change fate. This time Powerplex was actually able to live. Did he make the right choice? Who knows? Maybe he made things better than they already were supposed to go, or maybe he made things worse. But either way, that didn't matter as much as what happened in the moment. The thousands of bodies that were still on his hands, the people that had died because of him, because he wasn't good enough, because he still held back until it was too late. Though at least this time he was able to resolve himself to kill the kaiju, rather than trying to spare it. Who knows what would have happened if he didn't go all out like he did in that moment. Even though there were definitely bright sides to this, even though this most certainly went better than how it went originally, he couldn't quite see it. No, it wasn't that he couldn't see it, he didn't allow himself to see it. Not after all of that. He needed to make sure to continue to remind himself of his own failure. He could never allow himself to forget that. He then heard somebody land behind him, as he said, "Sorry about flying off like that, Eve." But when he looked behind him, he didn't see Eve. No, he saw something that was confusing, that shocked him to his very core, that made him question a lot of things right now. The person he saw was a reflection of himself. It was another him, but they were wearing similar clothes to what Anissa had wore, a Viltrumite version of himself. Raising both of his hands preparing to fight, this had to be some trick. Before remembering back to what Anissa had said, that another Viltrumite was going to arrive, was this what they meant? Why now? Why did they have to arrive now at the worst time? And more importantly, why did they look so much like him? It felt like it had to be him. The resemblance was uncanny, but at the same time, there was no way, right? But he then said, "Easy there, easy. I'm not here to fight you. Instead, I'm here to talk. I'm not part of your universe. And as I think you figured out, while I'm not the same you, I am still you." Invincible's eyes widened in that moment as his guard slightly lowered. He was still a bit on guard considering everything he had seen today, but at the same time, if this was another version of himself, he was confused. Invincible, in response to the Viltrumite Mark, said, "Well, Anissa said something similar and we still ended up fighting, so forgive me for not fully lowering my guard." That caused the Mark to chuckle a little bit before he began to move towards the cliff and took a seat himself, patting the ground and telling Mark to sit next to him. And Mark followed, taking a seat right down next to him as they both looked towards the ocean. Cecil was right now sitting down at the Pentagon, looking over things. He was trying to figure out where those portals came from, before one of the members of the GDA came into the room, telling him there was another disruption in space. The moment Cecil activated the satellite in order to get a better image of it, what he saw completely shocked him and surprised him. He saw another Mark, but they were more wearing a Viltrumite type of armor. This confirmed it more for him than anything else. This had something to do with the multiverse. He already had several members of the GDA preparing to bring in the new Hail Mary they found. Curious to see what they would be able to do with it, but now they were focused on this. Though they also wanted to bring in Powerplex. This brought up a whole lot of different questions, and potentially there being a much bigger threat than this out there. But for now, he was also preparing to teleport Reaniman just in case, though he was hoping he wasn't going to have to. Cecil didn't make it clear to Mark that he was listening in. However, he was curious, especially getting the confirmation this Mark was from a different universe. Both Marks were looking towards the ocean. It honestly felt rather calm right now, almost like it felt entirely separated from the world. Mark was the one to break the silence, as he said, "You wanted to talk with me about something, so please just get on with it." Which caused the Viltrumite version of himself to chuckle a bit as he said, "I must admit, the amount of us that are straight to business is rather rare. Most would rather enjoy having a little bit of small talk between the two of them, or just get distracted. However, I am just like you in that regard. So let's get right to business. I've come here to make an offer. From what I understand about you, you want to help people, you want to redeem them, give them a chance at a second life. You want to save the world. I can offer you a multiverse of knowledge. Answers to people you haven't even fought yet, answers on how to turn them to the good side. In a multiverse, everything is possible. There is definitely a universe that exists where everything goes the same as this universe, except 1 hour ahead. Or mayhaps even days ahead. Ones that hold the key simply because their one multiversal change is just the fact that things happen earlier or later. I can also offer you better dimensions to train, better universes with secrets that we don't have access to yet." Mark's eyes widened upon hearing that. The fact that he was offering this, he was offering the secrets on how to turn every single person they might ever end up fighting against good? Heavens knows what could happen from that. It was being offered to him. The power to make sure something like the Chicago incident would never happen again. Something like Anissa would never happen again. Something like powerplex and that centipede would never happen again. However, upon thinking of that one in particular, it made another thought come to mind. He still was unsure where those came from. And just out of nowhere, another version of himself also comes over to try and convince him of something and offers him the solution? Something wasn't adding up here. So that led him to ask, "What do you want in exchange?" Something like this doesn't just come for free. I know better than that. And that caused an amused reaction to rise on Viltrumite Mark's face for a moment. And like that, you're smarter than so many Marks across the multiverse. You have no idea how many would just blindly agree to a promise like this. There's one person's planet we need to attack. One universe's. Mainly because I don't have the power to transport us across the multiverse. My partner Angstrom is the one who holds that power. He has a grudge against another version of us, one who had a similar life to you. However, the one difference between them is the fact that he didn't start training after he got beaten by Father. So his plan right now is to release us alongside 18 other, much more evil versions of us. Which made Mark's eyes widen upon hearing that. They're going to ruin another version of themselves' lives? Though as Mark continued to think, he was able to see something else. Viltrumite Mark wasn't telling the full truth. More than likely they were being observed. It is a necessary sacrifice. As I believe you've already figured out, I joined the Viltrumite Empire myself. The time I joined was when we battled against Anissa, though in your universe where you didn't give up, I did, because she was the one who held the path. So listen to your other version of yourself when they tell you, this is the path forward, this is the best way to go. We don't even need to kill anyone, we just need to cause so much destruction that that universe fears that mark. I know you hate having to kill people in exchange for making a world better, but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you property damage and the ruining of someone's reputation. In exchange, you get the universe's knowledge on how to turn your people good, on how to fix all problems. The solutions exist in the multiverse, and all you have to do is cause some property damage, scare some people, and help out in ruining this Mark's reputation. That is it. All things that can be repaired. Even better, you can save lives. I can tell you this much, you are stronger than most of the evil variants of us. So if they try and kill people in that other universe, you can save them. But as Invincible thought about that for a few seconds, he shook his head no. As he then said, I can't. I just can't. Not when the man you're working with is responsible for so many deaths that happened today. Not when the man you were working with ended up turning a good man, someone who didn't have to go down this path and accelerated it. Angstrom blinked. He was watching this entire thing happen, and he had to admit he was surprised. the fact he figured all of this out. He was smarter than he thought. However, Mark wasn't done yet as he kept speaking. Someone like that can't be trusted, and you should know that. I can tell you're not a bad person. You might have done some evil things, but I know the reason why you joined the Empire. It was because you saw the Viltrumite Empire as the only way to solve things. But you're being given a second chance, so please just join my side instead. That man you're working for is likely already figuring out a way to betray you. So instead, help me out. We'll figure out a way to reach Angstrom. We'll figure out a way to beat him. You haven't done anything wrong yet here. So, take this chance as a new one. Viltrumite Mark went quiet for a second, contemplating this. He was told all versions of himself inevitably turned evil, but this one managed to pass one of the trials that most others failed at. And he felt something familiar in him, an emotion he had long since suppressed. Hope. Hope that by continuing to go down the path they were going, things might have been better. Originally he thought of himself as stubborn, but now he could see the reflection of himself. One who never gave up, one who was determined to redeem others no matter what. As this, Mark simply responded with a before deciding to fly away, leaving Mark to think for now. A part of him did believe in this Mark now, but he also had no intention to force them through this. Instead, he connected to Angstrom and told him to send him back to his world. However, that was when a chuckle rose from Angstrom as he said, "No, I don't think I'll be doing so. I was only going to bring you back if you managed to bring the other one with you. And besides, you didn't have any plan to work with me. You wanted to kill me. Which granted, I must admit you are rather smart to be able to see through my plan. But since you like this world so much, I think I'll keep you here. I wish you the best of luck. You'll fit in well." As the drone he was talking with self-exploded, leaving Viltrumite Mark here, completely stranded and alone. As his eyes widened, worry entered onto him. His Earth was now left without a protector. Sure, he knew the Viltrumite Empire was going to be on his side and more than likely could handle most things, but what if Angstrom sent something their way? This was bad. He needed to figure out some way to get back to his own universe, but he just didn't know how. Not yet. He needed to think. He needed some time to think. So he left the planet for now. He did have some memory of some technologically advanced aliens, thanks to the maps of the Viltrumite Empire. Maybe he could find those and get their help. Though as he was going one way, unknown to him, someone else was starting to approach Earth. They had just moved past Mars. Conquest was on his way. Invincible, truth be told, was more confused if anything else. Granted, this entire day had been confusing. A multiversal centipede, a multiversal Hail Mary, and powerplex wearing an armor from the multiverse, and now a different version of himself he talked to? Giannis just wanted to sleep. Though this all had worked as a pretty good distraction from what had actually happened today. As a thought returned to him, he still wasn't good enough. He still wasn't strong enough. Because of him, those people were dead. As he closed his fist, it was clear to him now his threats had gone far beyond just simply his own universe. Whoever this Angstrom person was, that was his true threat. He just hoped he'd be able to prepare for next time they attacked, and that maybe, just maybe, they'd be able to figure out some way to attack him first. But that was something they were going to have to prepare for either way. He felt he was now starting to understand Cecil's view. But for now that wasn't going to be his focus. For now instead he was going to focus on trying to help as much repairs as he could, as he began to fly back towards the city. Though he did also make one call to Cecil, as he asked him if he could help out with creation of a new suit. He wanted to make sure he's prepared for the next time. Of course he knew it would take a lot of time for this to be prepared, but either way he still wanted to see if it could be. And Cecil smiled a little bit, happy to see they still had a working relationship, before giving the confirmation that he most certainly could. After Mark spent some time helping out with the repairs, he did eventually return home. After some venting towards his mom and Adam Eve, they were able to help him see a little bit better. There wasn't really much he could do. He ultimately had done the best he could, and he should be proud of himself for that. Though a part of Debbie wondered about that other Mark that they had seen, and she hoped for a better future for them. After all, even though they weren't her Mark, she still partly felt responsible. After all, it still was her son. Alternate dimension or not, it still ultimately was another version of her own son. Not even knowing the fact that that Mark was now stuck within their dimension. As this bizarre yet rather emotional night finally came to a close. One that felt like it was going on for far too long now. Little did they know, something far worse was on its way. It was another day for Invincible. Another day of patrols that seemed to be going mostly normal. And after how hectic things had been recently, he was honestly kinda happy about that. There was thankfully no time traveling future versions of the Immortal he had to kill. No alternate dimension amped enemies, no people from this dimension using alternate dimension tech. Sure, there were monsters that he had to fight, but that was pretty normal for him up to this point. But then, he heard a voice from behind him as he felt a shadow rise.
Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
Invincible was caught off guard by hearing that voice, as he looked behind him to see what was there. At the same time, Cecil immediately contacted him as well, telling him another Viltrumite had arrived. However, he was unfortunately a little bit too late with this warning. Under normal circumstances, he would have been on top of that, but with how many threats are coming from different dimensions, Cecil had his men more focused on space-time disruptions, entirely forgetting up to this point the fact that Anissa had warned them a much worse Viltrumite was going to come, and upon scanning, they were able to see that they were absolutely right. So as Conquest was giving his speech, Cecil warned him in that moment to be very careful when fighting him. He wasn't truly sure if he could beat Conquest yet. Just based off physical stats and bodies alone, Conquest was stronger. Invincible did still have a chance, but Conquest was stronger, however they knew better than that. Anissa and Invincible were equal when Anissa had arrived, and yet she still was able to win via skill. So Invincible was going to have to be very cautious. Cecil was preparing to teleport over the reanimant as well. But for now he advised Mark to just keep talking, stall for a little bit and see how much information they can continue to get. Maybe if they continue to scan they might be able to figure out some weakness. Anissa told me that you are on the edge of joining our Viltrumite Empire, though I'm not quite sure I see it. This planet doesn't look conquered. Or perhaps you conquered it in a non-standard way. From what I know, you know quite little about our people and how we're supposed to be doing things. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt here purely because Anissa spoke well for you. So please tell me Anissa was wrong. And that made both Cecil and Invincible blink, catching them completely off guard, as Invincible thought for a moment, what do you mean please tell me Anissa was wrong? And in that moment, both Cecil and Invincible were realizing the type of person they were up against. This was not someone that could be tricked, this was not someone that could be manipulated, this wasn't someone who would accept compromise. This was someone who wanted absolute violence, and was right now only being held back due to another Viltrumite speaking well of them. But also, this was a good chance for Invincible to properly blow off steam. He was still angry about everything that had happened yesterday. And in front of him was someone he was certain couldn't be redeemed. Someone who didn't truly believe in the ideals the Empire stood for. While he didn't agree with them, he could at least respect that they wanted to make the universe better. No, they were just using the Viltrumite Empire as an excuse. So Invincible raised up his hands as he said, "No, I will not be joining, nor will I be allowing you to conquer my planet." Before a chuckle came out from Conquest as he said, "Good." You had to admit he was impressed. Invincible could see right through him. Granted, he wasn't really trying to hide it. He wasn't really here for Viltrum, no. He was here because he enjoyed this. He enjoyed battle. And if this Viltrumite was physically as strong as Anissa, and had time to train since that point, oh, he was certain they were going to be fun. That was when Cecil sent a signal over to Mark, as Mark prepared to rush right towards him, but that was a feint. A total of 6 Reaniman teleported right above Conquest, and each of them slammed their fists down onto his body, while at the same time Invincible clapped, launching a shockwave right towards Conquest's chest. Conquest went out of his way to not actually block that attack from Invincible. However, in a rather quick motion he cut off all of the Reaniman's heads, and the impact from the clap, it was much stronger than he expected, as a smile slowly rose onto his face. Okay. Conquest was certain now he was going to enjoy this. Invincible flew a bit backwards after getting a warning from Cecil. At the same time, the destroyed Reaniman began to glow, as they each blew up right onto Conquest. Not really causing too much damage, but it did manage to distract him a little bit. But as the smoke faded, he felt a punch land on him from Invincible, before he wrapped his arms around him and began to push Conquest, saying, "Let's not fight here." His goal right now was to take Conquest to somewhere else. But Conquest smiled a little bit as he said, "Alright," before moving both of his hands onto him, beginning to spin, throwing him through one building, no 2, no several, as Conquest flew towards Invincible and grabbed him by the head, and throwing him right down to a street of people. And at the last moment, Invincible was just barely able to stop himself, as he told them they needed to run now. But Conquest then said, "You care way too much about these ants." but I do have to give you some props. You were trying to control the level of shockwave your clap caused, and you did pretty well with that. But let me show you what a true clap can cause. Before he lifted his hands backwards and clapped. And the clap he had just launched, its effects were catastrophic, as hundreds of buildings were launched in different directions, and in a single moment, he managed to cause more death than what was present in the Chicago incident, forming a crater where a large part of the city used to be, as Invincible was launched high up into the sky, with Conquest chasing right after him. He felt blood trickling down from his nose. He's had enough. He's had enough of seeing people die because of him. As he chased right towards Conquest, the two of them clashing fists, creating a shockwave that dispersed several of the clouds around them. While Conquest was overpowering him in that clash, he did have to admit he was surprised at the fact that Invincible wasn't being completely overpowered. As Conquest began to smile a bit more, he was excited now for this. And the two of them began to rapidly clash blows, flying away from each other again and again in order to clash. Each time they did, they dispersed several of the clouds around them. But even so, Invincible was being pushed back further and further. He had a disadvantage in this. However, the fact he could keep up at all was rather impressive. As Cecil was forced to watch this, he didn't really have much he could do right now. He was trying to think on what the best way to do this would be. I told him to prepare a teleporter on the reaniman. They wouldn't be able to directly help him yet, but soon, maybe if they got closer to the ground they might be able to. He still did have the sound devices, but he wanted to wait to use those for now, both because he didn't want to reveal that card to Invincible, but also because of the fact that it would likely take Invincible out of the fight. As Cecil looked over to one of the scientists and told them, "Is Project RC ready?" And they nodded. They just needed Invincible to bring them closer to the ground, then they'd be able to help. As Cecil told Mark, try and bring Conquest closer to the ground. This time though, Conquest was able to land a punch on his stomach, sending him even higher up into the air. As Mark said, easier said than done. Cecil sighed as he said, "Fair, sending someone over your way to help. Though, you're not going to like who I'm sending." It didn't take long for Invincible to realize as he sighed before saying, "Don't matter. It's giving him a chance at redemption, and honestly I kinda need it." Giving Cecil the go-ahead as Donald walked out, before Cecil picked up on someone else coming to the area. No, two people. And he realized exactly who those two people were, as he then said, "Mark, you're about to have some company." Right as Conquest was rushing towards him to attempt to land another punch on him, he suddenly felt a pink chain wrap around his hand. Mark's eyes widened as he realized who had arrived, as he thought to himself, "Oh no." But he quickly took advantage of this chance, as somebody else also flew next to him, as both Invincible and Oliver landed a punch onto Conquest's face, sending him flying towards the ground. But Conquest was still just able to stop himself as he smirked a little bit. Now things were going to get more fun. While Adam Eve flew next to them as well. Invincible looked at them as he said, "You guys shouldn't be here. This guy is way too strong." Both Oliver and Adam Eve shook their head no, as Oliver said, "We're not going to let you fight this old guy alone." Adam Eve nodded in agreement as she said, "You're not strong enough to take him down solo." Invincible wasn't happy about this, but at the same time this was their best option. As Conquest smirked before saying, "Seems we got the full family reunion. How interesting." But then, a lightning bolt struck Conquest, as somebody else had joined into the field, being teleported above them. A familiar face to both Adam Eve as well as Mark. Powerplex had arrived in the upgraded armor he was wearing yesterday in the fight. But he didn't say anything to them, making his purpose for why he was here rather clear, to help beat Conquest and then leave. Though he had to use a jetpack in order to keep himself in the air. Powerplex immediately rushed after Conquest, while at the same time Invincible told Adam Eve and Oliver they needed to bring Conquest to the ground. That way they could begin the true backup plan they had in mind. The two of them nodded in agreement, while at the same time Powerplex rushed towards Conquest, but Conquest was far too fast, as he first landed a hard punch right onto Powerplex's chest, a harder blow than he had ever taken in his life. It felt like he was breaching into the upper limits of how much he could absorb, as he was sent flying back tens of feet, before Conquest chased right after him again, landing another punch, this time on his stomach. As he said, "I gotta admit, I wasn't expecting a human to be able to survive one punch from me. I was expecting my punch to just completely tear through you." And as he was about to go for a third punch, Adam Eve launched a chain right around his arm. At the same time, Invincible and Oliver were holding that chain in order to pull him downwards. Using it in order to pull Conquest back a little bit and distract him for a moment, just long enough for Powerplex to turn, focusing all of the new lightning he had just generated into his arm. So much lightning was being compressed all at once, it honestly was rather heavy. as he landed a hard punch right onto Conquest's face, releasing all that lightning at once and sending him flying into the ground. Oliver and Invincible at the last moment were able to let go as well of the chain, so they weren't dragged with him, as a massive crater was created. But that only caused Conquest to laugh a little bit, as he said, "Okay, I can see why you're so interested in these humans. A lot better than I thought. Of course, not anywhere close to my level, but still a lot better than I thought." Conquest also realized he was now on the ground, as the four of them began to float downwards. And he began to see tens of Reanimen teleport to the area. Almost 100 were now here and present, as Conquest couldn't help but chuckle a little bit before saying, "Your normal robotic humans didn't really do anything to me. I can still cut all of them down. I'm still far too strong for any of you to handle. What do you think you're going to be able to do to me? The number of ants won't matter after I crush each of them." But that was when something else landed. Something that was familiar to both Adam, Eve, as well as Mark, catching them both off guard, but at the same time it made sense. It was one of the same centipedes that Doc Seismic used, but not just that, it had Reanimen tech. As Mark chuckled a little bit before saying, "By the way, those centipedes are only second to me in terms of power, and that was without the tech that was just added to them. And considering what they can do for normal humans, man, you are kinda screwed now." And upon Conquest seeing that creature, that kaiju, he couldn't help but chuckle a bit to himself as he smiled. This was going to be so much fun. That reaction was a lot more worrying. They were expecting some more worry, something at least, but at the same time, hopefully this was just overconfidence. As Mark then asked Cecil, "Do you have any more Rihanna centipedes?" Before Cecil said no. This was the only one they had enough time to develop. They were still working on other ones, but this was all they could do. They were going to have to make this work. A swarm of Reanimen all began to jump down towards Conquest. As they were doing so, Adam Eve lifted up her hand. Each of them were surrounded in a pink glow, an armor forming around their bodies in order to amplify their physical traits even further. As he clapped his hands together, sending a massive shockwave at one of the sides of the Reanimen. However, another group landed immediately behind him, as several punches were landed on Conquest's back. Now, of course, not all the Reanimen could work at the same time, but the fact they could land so many blows on Conquest at once was still rather useful. But it barely took Conquest any time at all in order to deal with the second batch. With a simple swipe of his hands, even with Adam Eve's armor protecting them, he was able to tear through the heads of all the Reanimen near him. This when both Invincible and Oliver took their chance, as Oliver landed a kick right on the back of his head, while at the same time Invincible landed a hard punch on his back. The combined blows causing Conquest to spit out a little bit of blood. As he turned around to try and grab both of them by the head, a massive bolt of lightning hit Conquest, slamming him into the ground. Not just was powerplex using his power from earlier that he had gone from Conquest hitting him, but also some more additional Reanimen that had landed some blows on him as well, giving Invincible and Oliver just enough time in order for them to move out of the way. And as Conquest was about to chase after them, he felt a hard bite land right between his stomach and his back. This was a result of the Reanipede, as it began to inject poison into Conquest and fast. A smile rose onto them. Cecil now knew they had a pretty good chance at winning this fight. However, with the Reanipede so close to them, Conquest released a massive shockwave of force, forcing the Reanipede off its body and killing it a moment after. However, after killing it, he felt a bit of dizziness begin to rise over him. To make it even worse, a large bolt of lightning immediately hit him right in the head, slamming him back down into the ground. But it felt like it did even more damage than it was supposed to. This poison already did have a weakening ability, but thanks to the GDA, it was magnified heavily. Adam Eve took advantage of this chance, making pink chains rise around his legs and arm in order to hold him down. On top of that, 3 Reanimen jumped down on both sides, each of them holding one of the chains in order to make sure he couldn't escape. And Invincible landed right in front of Conquest, with Reanimen beginning to land all around them. As Invincible said, "In the past, I used to think I need to be strong enough to be able to protect this planet on my own." He then closed his fist, as all the Reanimen also closed their fists, and each landed a hard punch right onto Conquest. Invincible in particular aiming for the scar across Conquest's head. But I learned true strength on Earth is the strength of having others to rely on. As powerplex released a massive bolt of lightning again, all focused down towards Conquest. Before doing so again and again, the Reanimen landing rapid blows as well as Invincible, until eventually Conquest was knocked out. That was when Cecil contacted Invincible saying, "Wait, Invincible, don't kill him. He's our only chance at getting details and information on the Viltrumite Empire right now." Cecil was hoping after everything, Invincible might now be willing to listen to him. However, to Cecil's surprise, Invincible didn't actually yell at him. Instead, he took a moment to think, before he then said, "Cecil, you heard what he wanted, right? And you know his power as well. Once he recovers, there's no one here who's going to be able to stop him. Even if I do get stronger, it won't be fast enough to stop him again. Most of all, he's also going to be aware of our tricks now. This is someone who has to die. I know he's a good and useful source of information, but we can't risk someone like that. Not someone who we can't guarantee that we can keep contained. And Cecil was actually surprised at this. Mark was approaching this a lot more logically than he was originally expecting. But that was because of something Mark had learned. Thanks to people like Powerplex, he had learned going straight with his emotions might not be the best way to do it. Same with the Immortal. Because he fully gave in to everything he was feeling, he ended up almost causing the entire Earth to die in the future timeline. If he wanted to redeem people, if he wanted to help people turn good the right way, he was going to need to make sure that the reasons made sense, not just based on emotion. As Cecil then said, "Well, damn. Alright, take him out then. I'm certain another opportunity will show itself in the future. But make sure to keep his body intact. I think you already know what I have planned to do with it." And Mark nodded as much as he hated that completely. As he then said, "Cecil, I want you to understand this. As much as I'm not going to stop you from turning him into one of those, at the same time I'm not going to approve of it either." As Cecil nodded before saying, "You don't have to finish him off if you don't want to, by the way. It'll just take me a bit longer in comparison." But once Invincible heard that, he shook his head no, as he said, "It's time I fully learn how to become the proper protector of this planet." Remembering back to when he had to kill the future version of the Immortal, but for some reason this felt easier in a way. After all, this was someone who he couldn't justify living. He knew it was someone who couldn't turn good, someone who couldn't be redeemed. But it was also a reminder of why the Viltrumite Empire needed to die, and why he was going to make sure they did. As he finished Conquest off right there. 4 days would end up passing since this point, since the battle against Conquest and its success. The first day Invincible spent mainly recovering. Physically, yes, but also mentally. Thankfully, he didn't take too much brutal damage. The next day after that, he spent relaxing, mainly out of Cecil's suggestion. Not to mention, there were more than enough heroes in order to cover for him. But one of these days, Mark was sitting down thinking on everything that had happened. Somebody else landed behind him. The other version of himself had returned, catching Mark completely off guard. He thought they might have left, they might have returned to where they once were, their original dimension, but no, they were still here. Before Mark could say anything or question why he was still here, Viltrumite got the first word in. "Color me impressed. I was not expecting you to be able to beat Conquest. I mean, granted, you didn't do it on your own, so I was still somewhat right about that, but I was not expecting you guys to actually beat him. You did well, and you also made the right choice by choosing to kill him instead of leaving him alive." Mark didn't even acknowledge what he just said, as he asked, "Why are you still here? I thought you were going to go back to Angstrom," which caused him to sigh a little bit before he took a seat down. "Well, you were right." As he explained everything, the fact that Angstrom did betray him, the fact he was now stuck here. And he was worried about his own dimension. While he didn't know that the Earth was likely going to be protected thanks to the Empire, he wasn't too sure about that. But either way, there wasn't really much he could do. He was stuck here. He did spend some time out in space trying to look for something, but he couldn't really find any tech that would allow him to go to another dimension, let alone back to the one he came from. So he returned back to Earth. Now that he was stuck here, he didn't really have much else he could do. He didn't have any connections to anybody in this universe. Other than, well, his alternate version of himself. Mark thought about what to do next in that moment, thinking for a couple of seconds before saying, "Well, I know you don't really like the Viltrumite Empire. You're just doing it because it was the only way forward. How about we do a little bit of a test? Try and be a hero again like me, and see if you can make a better difference helping people. I know you're strong, and since you're basically stuck here with me, you might as well. Not really much better things to do, unless you want to go join the Viltrumite Empire, but after I killed Conquest, I don't think they're going to be welcoming you, even if you explain you are from another dimension." And that one made Viltrumite Mark laugh a little bit before he then said, "Oh, you might actually be surprised. The Viltrumite Empire is quite heartless. They might be even more willing to welcome me after that. But I'll play your game. Why not? I don't really have much better to do anyways. Though there is something else I do want to do now that I'm here. I want to meet your mom. Or, well, our mom. The one that exists here." And that one made Mark smile a bit before nodding. He knew Debbie would probably be fine with this. Both of the Marks would eventually arrive back home. Currently, Adam, Eve, and Oliver weren't actually here. Oliver at school and Adam, Eve had some work to do. But Debbie was here, as she opened the door to see not just one Mark, but 2 Marks. And she remembered the other one, the one that Mark had told her about. She could see there was an immediate difference between the 2 of them. While her son was much more relaxed and chill, this one was a lot more tense, a lot more polite. Though oddly, they also called them Debbie instead of Mom, mainly because, well, this technically wasn't his mom, but also because Viltrumite Mark wasn't really sure if he'd be allowed to call them that, which Debbie told him that they were, also because she felt kinda weird hearing Mark's voice call her Debbie instead of Mom. And that one did cause Viltrumite Mark to lighten up a little bit, and the three of them had a nice night, getting to know each other better. A total of 1 week would pass. Both of them found themselves down in Art's basement, getting their new hero costumes ready. Viltrumite Mark decided to combine his old hero appearance with his Viltrumite colors. However, that caused a joke to come from mainline Mark as he said, "Okay, I didn't know you were sponsoring Oreos now." Viltrumite Mark sighed as he said, "No, I'm just merging my old identities." Meanwhile, Mark's outfit remained pretty similar to how it was before, aside from a new addition that he made thanks to the help of Adam Eve as well as the GDA, gauntlets around his arms in order to enhance his punching power even further, using the design of the reanimate, heavier materials made by Adam Eve and found thanks to Viltrumite Mark being able to tell them where they were and their composition. And with that, the both of them felt they were ready. Now Earth had a new protector, and on top of that, they had a protector that was truly ready to take on the journey of being the protector of Earth. And with that for now, we put a close on the story of what if Mark started training early. However, this is not the end of their story. After all, they both still have conflict with Angstrom Levy, and both of them will return.